and welcome to the second online forum of the Global Strategy Institute at Korea Advanced Institute of Science and Technology on the future of education in a non-contact society in the post-coronavirus era. We're coming to you from KAIST's main campus in Daejeon, Korea, and streaming live on YouTube, Korean National TV, and Naver TV. A recorded version of this forum will later be broadcast on Arirang TV. My name is Sang-Ah Lee. I'm a faculty member here at the Department of Bio and Brain Engineering, and I will be your moderator today. For those of you who are unfamiliar, the Global Strategy Institute was launched in February of 2020 as a representative think tank of KAIST for global issues on the future of science and technology. We held our first inaugural forum in April on international cooperation in the coronavirus era. Today, we're excited to have top experts from all over the world joining us for our second forum on the future of education, particularly in a reduced contact society, and what role science and technology has in making it possible for us to maintain a high level of not only academic instruction, but also social interaction and emotional growth for our children. Before we begin our main program, it is my pleasure to introduce you to the president of KAIST, Professor Sung-Cheol Shin, for his welcome remarks.
Hello, everyone. It's my great pleasure to welcome you all. Thank you to the distinguished speakers, colleagues, and audience around the world for virtually joining us today. In particular, I'd like to thank Minister of Science and ICT Ki-young Choi, a KAIST alumnus, for making time for us despite his very busy schedule. Also, I'd like to thank Director Jung-ho Kim, Professor So-young Kim, and GSI staff members organizing this forum following inaugural forum in April. I hope this forum will provide a brief moment to reflect on how the pandemic has reshaped our classrooms and to envision the future education in the years ahead. Distinguished guests, in just 2 months, we have gathered online again. Unfortunately, the world is still suffering from pandemic. It's a challenging time for us all. The pandemic has severely disrupted an entire sector of our society. Among others, the education sector has been hit the hardest hit. 1.6 billion students from 192 countries, which account for 91% of the student population in the world, have experienced educational disruption in the past 4 months. Now, students around the world have been forced to study online, but for many, without access to the internet, the digital divide is wider than ever. Approximately 29% of the youth worldwide, nearly 350 million individuals, are not online. The barriers to digital access around the world are both complex and pervasive. It is obvious this digital disparity will accelerate educational inequality, eventually leading to irreparable socio-economic disparities. Successful education needs the full support of our communities and equal access to opportunities. We should seize this pandemic as an opportunity to make technologies more widely accessible. KAIST also reach out to our community. Our students volunteers have the local schools and teachers set up online classes. I'm pleased that we could play a part in creating virtual circle to build a better community. From March, KAIST went online for more than 1,200 of its spring semester classes. We offered 60% real-time classes via Zoom and 40% through the pre-recorded KAIST learning management system, which we built for the Education 4.0 initiative. KAIST started Education 4.0, a flipped learning system, back to 2012. This innovative system was designed to encourage learners' active participation and creative thinking capacity in the classroom, which are long-standing issues that Korea's unilateral education system needed to address. Education 4.0 enables the transition from lecturer-centric teaching to student-centric learning. We invest a lot to establish this system and build the infrastructure for online education. I have made every effort to expand Education 4.0 into as many classes as we possibly can. Despite these efforts over the past 7 years, the ratio of using the Education 4.0 platform remained at about 8% of the courses KAIST offered at the end of 2019. I feel fortunate that full-scale online classes we started during the pandemic will serve as the very positive momentum to advance the Education 4.0 initiative we have been pushing for so long. I believe the integration of information technology in education will be further accelerated, and online education will be eventually become an integral component of our education system. You know, Thomas Frey predicted by the year 2030, over half of the traditional college will have collapsed. He also said the largest company on the internet will be an education-based company that we haven't heard of yet. Virtual universities will play a crucial role, especially for the workers in the times dominated by ever-evolving technologies. They will help the many employees who wish to upskill and reskill their careers as a lifelong education platform. I hope this disruption we are experiencing will bring about opportunities for new technology and knowledges that we can leverage to reshape the future of education. Technological breakthroughs should be used to benefit us all. The private and public sector should collaborate to facilitate inclusive learning opportunities. I hope this forum will bring about many new ideas that can positively impact people, especially young people around the world, and build a better future for generations to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you, President Shin. Next, we have a special message from the Minister of Science and Information and Communications Technology of the Republic of Korea. Dr. Ki-young Choi, as President Shin mentioned, is an alumnus of KAIST who received his PhD in electrical engineering from Stanford University and taught at Seoul National University before serving as the Minister of Science and ICT. Here's Dr. Choi.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure to deliver this welcome speech for the Global Strategy Institute International Forum. As the Minister of Science and ICT of the Republic of Korea, I would like to thank you all for your participation and attendance. I would also like to thank KAIST President Shin Sung-chul and everyone who has worked to the forum. This forum presents an excellent opportunity to gather experts from around the world to discuss key issues that matter the most right now. With the emergence of the COVID-19 pandemic, politicians around the world have taken a step back from political ideologies to place a greater priority on the lives of their citizens. From an economic standpoint, existing manufacturing industries have struggled due to the shutdown of global supply chains, whereas new emerging industries such as biotechnology and artificial intelligence have seen rapid growth and expansion. Also, the information technology industry has seen several advancements that have accelerated the changes in fundamental economic practices. To take things further, the technology has allowed us to adapt to the COVID-19 pandemic through remote working, online education, and even online concerts, which in the past were not readily available in such large scales. Furthermore, the Korean government proposed the Korean New Deal last week, which is composed of two foundational plans, the Digital New Deal and the Green New Deal. The government announced this plan as a means of overcoming the economic crisis brought upon by COVID-19 through new economic pathways, such as a revitalization of the job market. The Digital New Deal is especially designed to create many new jobs involving data collection, standardization, processing, and aggregation processes. It also aims to help Korea to lead the post-COVID-19 era by boosting the data and AI industries through innovations in various aspects, including regulations. In terms of education, students from elementary to high school were not able to attend school for more than 10 weeks due to the pandemic. To counteract this issue, the government made various efforts to ensure all students could receive adequate education. Using the excellent internet infrastructure that extends to all parts of the nation, the government pushed to ensure sufficient, safe, and stable education through televised classes and Korea educational broadcasting system channels and online video lectures. Teachers have also played a big role by hosting live online classes and supporting students through social networks, ensuring that they can continuously help their students as they did in the physical classroom. However, we have also identified certain issues and limitations of remote education. Educational divides have widened due to the differences in internet environments and access to mobile devices necessary for online education. There are also issues regarding the programs and resources used for online classes. And we have seen that some teachers struggle to properly utilize remote learning tools, whereas others excel with them. To resolve these issues, the government is working with the private sector to ensure students from low-income families are granted equal opportunities in accessing and utilizing online education. Some examples include donations of smart devices, introducing free data plans for accessing educational content, as well as online and offline mentoring provided by students from science and technology universities. The Ministry of Science and ICT is also collaborating with relevant ministries such as the Ministry of Education to further develop the remote education industry through the implementation of AI, big data, and other technologies of the fourth industrial revolution. Additionally, we will work to improve educational content and provide support programs for teacher proficiency. In terms of tertiary education, science and technology universities such as KAIST are taking the lead in developing innovative and pioneering education models such as flipped learning, adaptive learning that considers individual student levels, and project-based learning with enterprises. We will analyze how effective these models are and make adjustments to apply them to other universities in the future. Lastly, In preparation of the digital-based post-COVID-19 era, the government must work to create new jobs and help citizens rapidly transition into these new professions. To flexibly react to rapid technological and industrial changes, we are planning to actively provide support for recurrent education to achieve a seamless digital transition of professions. The plan involves collaborating with local universities to provide remote learning opportunities for high-level professionals working at high-tech companies and research centers. Furthermore, with the technical job industry becoming unstable due to the rapid changing industrial landscape, we will provide a safety net for job transitioning. On June 22nd, the government announced the plan to promote digital inclusion with the vision of building a digitally inclusive world that benefits everyone. This plan aims to ensure digital equality through which underprivileged groups will also be able to easily access digital technology and services. While Korea's broadband and wireless internet infrastructure, as well as the ICT proficiency of its citizens, are internationally unrivaled, Korea ranks relatively low in terms of access to such technologies among the elderly and people with disabilities. As such, we plan to roll out support plans to help underprivileged groups gain access to digital devices and services, as well as help these groups pursue digital careers. The educational divide is not an issue unique to Korea. In April of this year, the United Nations announced that 188 countries had closed schools and that this affected over 1.5 billion children and young adults. The Korean government is working hard as a member of the international community to combat the digital divide that is growing between nations with and without the necessary internet infrastructure. We will continue to share our experiences in this area and collaborate with other nations. We will also continue to support and cooperate with the international community by sharing our disease prevention measures and experiences. Korea has been able to successfully respond to the COVID-19 pandemic without sacrificing the key principles of openness, transparency, and democracy. Our citizens have also demonstrated solidarity and inclusiveness in the face of the coronavirus threat. Even before the rapid economic and social changes that we are witnessing today, the Korean government has made it a priority to focus on building a nation that prospers together without discrimination or division, whether it be gender, region, class, or age. An innovative and inclusive nation was set as the country's vision, and we continue to pursue qualitative, human-centered growth. Based on our vision and experiences, we, as a nation, will do our utmost to help the international community and all of humanity return to peace and prosperity. Today's KAIST GSI International Forum will provide us with valuable opportunities to discuss global cooperation measures in terms of education innovations in the post-coronavirus era. It is imperative that the entire world pools its resources and works together to find a solution to this invisible threat that has suddenly placed the entire world at risk. I sincerely hope that through the discussions held today, we can lay the groundwork for global cooperation. I encourage all participants to share their ideas and insights during this forum. Your contributions will help open up a new era for the world. Lastly, I hope that this forum can become a message of hope for all people around the world suffering due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister, for your thoughtful message. Next, I'm very pleased to have with us Jeff Majankalda, the CEO of Coursera, who has helped the company in the past few years grow to serve over 62 million online students worldwide. He holds a bachelor's degree and MBA from Stanford University and worked for 18 years as CEO of Financial Engines before joining Coursera. Hello, Jeff. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you very much for having me. Thank you, President Shin, and the community at KAIST, who's been a longtime partner of Coursera. I'd love to just briefly describe Coursera and our views of what's happening around the world. This is a time of disruption. It's a time of great opportunity, and I think it holds a promise of collaboration that might be unprecedented. First, a little bit about Coursera. So Coursera was started in 2012 by a couple of Stanford professors, Daphne Fuller and Andrew Ng, and really with the vision of bringing world-class education to anyone in the world. And we think of our business as an ecosystem, a learning ecosystem that brings together learners, educators, and employers. Today, we have about 63 million learners on the platform who take online courses created by over 160 top universities, including KAIST. And we also have industry partners. These are companies who offer online courses on Coursera, mostly focused on technology skills and technology platforms. Our educator partners come to Coursera to really teach the world, to get access to individuals directly, B2C over the internet, and also B2B through a workforce distribution model where we sell into institutions. The institutions that we serve are basically three types. There's Coursera for Business, where over 2,400 businesses have hired Coursera to offer our partners online courses to their employees to help upskill and reskill their employees. That was offered about 5 years ago, and then a year after that, we launched Coursera for Government. This helps governments retrain civil service workers and also provide workforce development opportunities to retrain and reskill individuals for the careers of tomorrow. Then in Q4, October of 2019, we launched Coursera for Campus. This is a version of Coursera where any college or university in the world can license our partners' online courses to help teach students online. And you can imagine only months before the outbreak of the pandemic, this product turned out to be pretty important. So you can think of Coursera as a platform that brings together these three stakeholders. And because of our unique position globally, we have a good sense of what's happening among learners and educators and institutions who are trying to upskill and reskill learners around the world. Today, we have about 63 million learners. 80% are outside of the United States. And this chart shows you kind of the general dispersion of learners on Coursera. We have fewer than 500,000 learners in South Korea, but we have always had a presence there from the very beginning. And we're really just delighted at the global opportunity to serve the world through online learning. In terms of our university partners, they're also spread around the world. Most of them are in North America and in Europe, but we have a number of important partners in Latin America, in Russia, in India, in Australia, and in Asia, including 3 partners in South Korea, notably KAIST, who has authored 18 courses in 6 domains, so far has reached over 135,000 learners with online course enrollments, and just in 2020 alone has reached 60,000 learners. So we really appreciate our relationship with KAIST. The catalog at this point has been really expanding and now covers about 4,400 courses, from business all the way to arts and humanities. But what we found is the type of content that is most interesting to most of the learners is data science content, computer science content, and business content. We've recently launched a major initiative in healthcare in 2019 and have a couple of public health degrees that are delivered by our partners on the Coursera platform as well. Zooming in a little bit just to take a look at what happened at Coursera when we saw the outbreak of COVID-19. As was already mentioned, many schools were closed. 90% of all students lost access to their schools. But even as schools were closing, learners were moving online. So from mid-March to today, the online enrollments on Coursera are up 500%, over 30 million enrollments. Now you can see that it really spiked during the peak of lockdown and stay at home. It's been tapering off a bit, but I do think that we're going to settle into a new normal for online learning that is far more pervasive than what we've seen in the past. And when we look at demand across geographies, we see region after region after region, learners moving online and taking more online courses. And if you look at this chronologically, what you find is that it was almost contemporaneous with stay-at-home orders and school closures. Not only across geographies, but also across domains, we saw a dramatic increase in interest in online learning. So the 3 most popular domains are data science, computer science, and business. And they've grown 3, 4, and 5 times what the pre-COVID levels were. But in other domains like personal development, arts and humanities, life sciences, social sciences, engineering, and others, you've seen a similar dramatic increase in demand for online learning. Some of the courses that in 2020 and since COVID have broken out have been most popular include mental health types of courses like the science of well-being, as well as some more technical courses like machine learning, as well as learning-oriented courses like learning how to learn, as well as language courses, including one from one of our partners, Yonsei University. We recently launched Coursera Labs. There was a wonderful comment by the minister that the future of education will include not only theoretical conceptual knowledge, but also hands-on learning. And especially with the proliferation of software tools that allow people to manipulate, compute, and display data, learning how to use software tools and applying knowledge with tools of the trade will be an important part of the online educational process. What we've found is that Coursera Labs is particularly interesting among students. In Coursera Labs, without downloading any software, without configuring the software, and without downloading any data, in browser, students can follow along and build a hands-on project following an instructor. We only launched these projects in the last 60 to 90 days, and already we've had almost 500,000 enrollments in projects. And if you look at the split between students and non-students, we see that students in particular are hungry for online hands-on learning projects, probably mostly because they're looking for specific ways to complement that college degree with certifications and credentials that they know how to use the online tools of the trade. This is a little bit of a geographic heat map of where the projects are being taken. You see a heavy concentration in project utilization in India, the US, and in Europe. On March 12th, when we saw the school closures occurring, we decided with our partners to make Coursera for Campus available at no cost. And what we've seen has been extraordinary. In just the last 90 days, we went from 30 universities using Coursera for Campus to over 9,500 instances of Coursera for Campus being used for free by any college or university in the world. Over 1 million students have taken more than 5 million online classes and have conducted more than 14 million hours of learning in the last 90 days since we offered this program. And when you look at the most popular courses and projects, you see they're in the domains of computer science, data science, and business. They include things like programming for everybody in Python, Excel skills, AI for everyone, introduction to HTML5. Last slide here, when we think about where higher education might be going and the impact of COVID, I like to think of it in terms of six major trends. One is blended classrooms, where some students will be on campus, others will not. And some professors will be on campus and others will not. We'll be managing these health risks for quite some time, and it'll be an uncertain environment. So online and on campus will be a blended experience from here going forward. There'll be a much bigger emphasis towards online courses and full credentials like degrees. And I think KAIST was well ahead of its time in developing their Education 4.0 initiative. Not so many universities were as well prepared to move online as KAIST was. Part of what's happening with unemployment and also the lack of a residential experience for many students is they're going to be expecting lower tuitions. And so universities will need to think about how do we deliver high quality learning at lower cost. In addition, students seem to be caring much more about employment and job opportunities. So introducing job relevant skilling and training into the college experience will be important. Lifelong learning, we all know about that. But I think a huge opportunity, a very promising opportunity, is that COVID has forced us all to not only experiment with online learning, but also remote working. Online learning without the ability to do a job online from anywhere is only half of the promise. But if people can learn online and then can get jobs that are online jobs available, maybe in communities that are far away from where they're located, access to not only learning, but jobs will be far more universal. And then finally, we believe that content and credentials will be more modular and stackable as people have to flexibly fit learning into their working career. Thank you again for having me. I really appreciate it and wish you the very best for this conference.
Thank you very much, Jeff, for that very informative and inspiring presentation. Those are some astounding numbers. Next, we will hear from Dr. Eng Chai Tan, the president of the National University of Singapore. President Tan received his PhD in mathematics from Yale and has a long-standing record of promoting new, innovative ways of teaching. And today he will share with us his vision for the future of education. Hello, President Tan. It's a pleasure to have you with us today.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you, President Shin, for inviting me. Distinguished speakers and guests, thank you also for giving me a chance to share some of my views. Singapore has been affected by COVID quite severely. We just have undergone 2 months of a semi-lockdown. And the university was sort of reopened early June. We have put some measures in place, and I'm just briefly describing what are some of the measures. Of course, masks are essential now for everyone. Safe physical distancing is one of the key things that we do. We restrict our classes to no more than 50. We have converted a lot of our lecture theaters, which can hold more than 100 to 200 students, into classrooms meant for not more than 50 students. Any class classes of more than 50 will be done online. Because we have a lecture and tutorial system, so tutorials are still possible in these larger venues and with safe distancing. At the same time, we are also very adept at in enhancing our capability for identifying, tracking, tracing, and containing COVID cases. So this is something which Singapore, I think, has been doing, and it also requires organizations like NUS with a population of 52,000 to be quite adept at. So we take a lot of pains to make sure that we know who are the people attending classes, the whereabouts of people whenever they are in meetings. You go into a particular building, you have to scan a QR code, and so on and so forth. So that helps a lot in being able to identify and isolate infected cases as well as contacts, close contacts, and sort of prevent the other parts of the population or community from being infected. So there's quite a lot of measures. It does limit that physical interactions in classes, in our hostels, and in many of our activities. And that's something that we would have to learn to adapt for the next perhaps 6 months to 1 year. We foresee that we would have to be in this condition for at least a year. Now, there are also travel restrictions, and that is a big dent on our students and faculty members traveling for collaborations, for student exchange. And that also prevents foreign students from coming into our campus. So that's quite a bit of a restriction. It does have some implications on revenue, but I think the more concern is the diversity of student and the experiences that we are not able to leverage on. We have been thinking quite a lot about what are some of the implications. Now, we are already living in a fast-changing world and also a very complex world. The COVID-19 episode has basically accelerated everything. It is even faster now in terms of changing. It is even more complex. We are not just having a pandemic. We are having a global recession. And on top of that, there are many other crises happening across the world. So the world is actually getting to be very uncertain. And what does it demand of in terms of our graduates of the future? Right? We feel that we cannot predict the future of jobs, as jobs are very important for most graduates. Future of job is definitely unclear, but what we can have a better sense of what are some of the important skill sets that would enable our graduates to navigate the very complex and now very uncertain world. They certainly should be adaptable and resilient, right? They should have a bigger appetite for risk and higher tolerance for failures, right? Certainly, they should display empathy and be socially responsible. Without doubt, our graduates must be digitally enabled So they have to be very savvy and comfortable with a lot of the technology tools that are available and have to understand the power and limitations of some of these tools. And with the complexity of issues, our graduates have to be problem solvers, right? And in solving these problems, they have to be able to integrate knowledge from multiple disciplines. So these are some of the important attributes that we hope to see in our graduates. So the question is that how can we change our educational framework, curriculum, pedagogy to prepare our students so that they would have all these ideal attributes. And it is not easy when you talk about teaching. The easiest part perhaps is to train students to be digitally competent. But that would also require our faculty members to be digitally competent. And there's a spread. We know that our younger faculty members have no problems, but our more senior faculty members do have some problems with being digitally savvy, right? But faculty members would have to learn and find out ways to leverage technology to make sure that the teaching is more effective. One of the big challenges, at least in my perspective, is how to teach interdisciplinary skills, right? And the traditional way or the standard way that most universities or faculty members would do is that Professor A, say in a multidisciplinary course, Professor A will teach part A, Professor B will teach part B, and Professor C will teach part C. And it is up to the students to try to internalize the knowledge and the skills to connect A with B and with C. All right, that's not a very satisfactory way of teaching interdisciplinarity. So we need professors. Ideally, they would have done interdisciplinary research and therefore could highlight the knowledge and the skill sets that are needed for interdisciplinarity. And more importantly, interdisciplinarity should be pervasive. It should cut across all parts of the curriculum from the first year to the last year. And it has to be infused into projects, into labs, into experiential learning, internships, and what have you. It's easier said than done. I think this is actually one of the big challenges of being able to teach and guide students on integrative skills that are very much needed because of the complexity that our world is right now. And then there are some attributes like being adaptive, being resilient. These are attributes that probably are much harder to be taught in a classroom context. But you can devise experiential learning frameworks to inculcate that agility, adaptability, and resilience. So one example, for instance, in NUS, we attach our students to startups for 6 months to a year. And startups are small organizations. The students actually do a wide range of functions in a startup, all right, from the janitor all the way to the CEO of the startup. But by doing so, actually, they also learn, right, the different types of skill sets, and by understanding how startups repivot and respond to the ever-changing environment, they also learn to be adaptive, and they also learn resilience through this experience. So, in a nutshell, what NUS is trying to do is really how to better prepare our graduates, all right, for the more uncertain and fast-changing world. It's still a work in progress, but I think the future requires us to do this actually fast and not to take too much time to do it. Right. Thank you very much, I think, for listening.
Thank you for sharing your insights with us, President Tan. I think the issues that you raised ring very true with all educators all over the world. And it also occurs to me that the future education needs to start even before the level of the university. For our final opening speaker, I would like to introduce Dr. Baram Bikradnia, the president of Higher Education Policy Institute, which is UK's educational think tank. Dr. Bikradnia attended Oxford University and has worked for 4 decades in public service and education. Hello, Dr. Bikradnia.
Hello, and thank you very much. Can you see my screen?
Not yet. Are you sharing your screen?
I'm trying to share my screen.
Oh, we can see it now.
Good, okay. So, President Shin and distinguished colleagues, thank you for inviting me. I'm honored and excited to be invited to speak at this conference. My only regret is that my first visit to Korea should have been only virtual. Now, there are just 2 major points that I want to make this morning. I want to inject a note of caution and begin by observing that predictions of the death of the physical university, the university with walls, which COVID-19 has reignited, is one that I've been hearing for the 30 years that I've been working on higher education policy. And in all that time that it's been predicted, it's not happened. It won't happen, in my view. Of course, hundreds of thousands of people, millions over the years, have pursued their education online. But those have tended to be mature people, generally at work, and often hoping to achieve the skills and knowledge that will help to advance their careers. What's new today is that as a result of the COVID-19 crisis, they've been joined by literally millions of younger students around the world for whom the acquisition of skills and knowledge relevant to their career goals is only one of the things that they hope to acquire while they're at university, and probably not even the most important thing. Young people go to university, especially young people, for a host of reasons, with socialization, with maturation, with development of cognitive skills and abstract thinking, the fun of being at university, interacting with peers, and so on, things that online education is unlikely ever to be able to develop, certainly not to the extent of traditional education. Now, that's not to deny that with the development of student rooms, chat rooms, collaborative working, and so on, there have been great strides that go some way towards meeting the wider aspirations of young, but not only young students. But they'll only ever go part of the way. An essential feature of higher education, and one that's only provided by face-to-face education, is lost to those people at university today whose education has been disrupted by the COVID-19 crisis. And one hopes and prays that they will recover that before long. And indeed, when we asked young students themselves how they felt about different forms of interaction, virtual forms of learning were very much at the bottom of the list. These figures come from a survey of first-year undergraduate students that we conducted last year before the COVID interruption. Now, don't misunderstand me. I'm certainly not saying that online education hasn't got a valuable and proven place as a pedagogic tool that can enhance the experience of students. Technology is making a huge difference, including, as we've heard, a large growth in virtual programs. But that hasn't led and won't lead to the wholesale decline of physical programs. And I suspect our experience as a result of COVID-19 will reinforce the value that's placed on face-to-face education. What's undoubtedly the case, actually, is the extent to which conventional universities are taking advantage of new forms of technology-based provision, including MOOCs, and integrating them into their programs to create blended courses, the Coursera for Campus type development that was referred to by Jeff. That's likely, much more likely, in my view, to be the future impact of technology in higher education than the wholesale replacement of conventional programs, even less of traditional universities. The mistake that's being made by those who predict that conventional universities will be replaced by virtual provision is that they confuse the different purposes of university education in the eyes of the student. Some certainly regard it as a mechanism to gain the knowledge and skills needed to pursue their chosen career, or to improve their position in that career, or to change careers. And that's been the focus, especially of some virtual universities. But that isn't for everyone. And in particular for the majority of young students, that wouldn't provide them with the social and developmental features of a campus-based education. The former and the provision to satisfy them may develop and expand following the present crisis, and indeed may accelerate as a result, particularly for older and mid-career and career-changing students, the sorts of students we heard the minister referring to earlier. But that's unlikely to be at the expense of the latter. Those two are meeting different needs, or in the terminology of the market, they offer different products. And that brings me to the second point that I want to make. Online education, as I've already said, provides for hundreds of thousands of students, but the success rates of the students taking those programs is far lower than for those taking their programs conventionally. Distance learning students, both in the UK and the USA in general, have very poor completion rates. The best established and possibly one of the highest quality online universities in the world, the Open University in the UK, had a graduation rate of only 36%. In the USA, there's a 42% graduation rate at the Western Governors University, which is one of the better online universities, the distance learning universities, and that falls to 28% at the University of Phoenix. Now, it's true that people take online courses, and especially MOOCs type courses, for a host of reasons, of which completing their program or obtaining recognition for this is only one. But these non-graduation rates that I'm showing here are actually for people who set out with the intention of obtaining a degree qualification. And the figure for MOOCs tell a similar story. A recent study from MIT found that online courses had a huge non-completion rate of about 96% on average over a 5-year period. And that figure hadn't improved over that 5-year period. Now that actually certainly is not a criticism of MOOCs. Most students don't sign up to a MOOC with anything other than a curious interest. But it should raise alarm bells if we're looking to online courses, online programs, rather, to replace face-to-face campus-based degrees. And although recently there's been an increase in the number of online degree programs provided through MOOC, something that wasn't discussed by Jeff, as opposed to standalone courses, I've not been able to find any information about progression rates. The providers of the online MOOC-based programs, the online MOOC-based degrees rather, are rather coy about these, and there must be a strong suspicion that progression rates are low, as indeed they are, as I've said, with the other better established online degree programs. So while there may be good social reasons for focusing on part-time and distance and online education, and demand will certainly exist and grow in the next decade as increasing numbers find their jobs and their skills becoming redundant, and as they need to re-educate and retrain, universities that provide for these will need to redouble their efforts to ensure that their students have been more successful than they have been in the past. And again, don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying that online programs don't play an essential role in the ecosystem of higher education. They provide for students who might not otherwise be able to go to university, and they provide an option and an alternative for those who need it. But what I am pointing out is that the experience so far has been that, especially for young people who need more than just facts, skills, and knowledge, not only is face-to-face education, integration with their peer groups, and interfacing with their professors essential, it has a far better outcome and ultimately is more efficient than the predominantly online, in many cases exclusively online education that they're now receiving as a result of COVID-19. Now, it could of course be that that will change, and necessity being the mother of invention, the present crisis will lead to the sorts of strides in quality and outcomes that will reverse the situations I've described. But it would take a huge leap of faith to believe that that will be the outcome of the present crisis. And my fear is that we will have a generation of university students who suffer from their withdrawal from face-to-face and conventional education. So online education undoubtedly has a part, and for some people it provides the only means of achieving the qualifications that they seek, and it must be valued for that. But let's not lose sight of the fact that online education is without question second best. Students who must be able to pursue their full-time traditional education primarily pursued face-to-face. There will increasingly be an online element. Blended education undoubtedly has its place and has proved itself. But to give students the best chance of succeeding at university, succeeding academically, quite apart from achieving all the other benefits that young people in particular seek from university and obtain from university, they must be given the opportunity of returning to their full-time programs face-to-face as quickly as possible. And so briefly, my conclusions are that we have to get students back to university as soon as possible, and we must use the opportunity provided by COVID-19 to improve the outcomes of online education and completion rates. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that very important message. I hope that we can discuss and resolve these issues together across different countries. Now, I'd like to conclude the first part of our forum by thanking all of the speakers who joined us today. As an educator myself, it has been an exceptional experience to have all of you come together on this occasion from all different cultures and time zones, but with one common goal, which is to make the future better for the next generation. We wish you and your family continued health and safety. Now it's time to move on to the keynote panel discussions. The first on innovative higher education will be chaired by Professor So-young Kim.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first session. I'm the director of the Korea Policy Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution, which is co-hosting this forum. Before starting the session, I'd like to point out some interesting feature of this forum. Typically, we cannot really invite such a high-profile keynote speakers in one place, but because of COVID-19, we are now inviting speakers from 4 continents, Asia, Africa, North America, and also Europe. So this is another opportunity that COVID-19 has opened up for us. The first session addresses the emerging challenges for higher education in the age of COVID-19. And also, this session is going to be an opportunity for our globally renowned experts to share insights from their own experiences on educational innovations and also technological issues. In particular, when we are expecting the full bloom of fourth industrial revolution technologies in non-contact society. And the second session is going to deep dives on the questions of digital inequalities, which comes after the first session. So let us start the first session with Professor Paul Kim. But I'd like to mention that this is going to be very tight schedule, so all speakers of the first session, I'd like to remind that please limit your presentation to 10 minutes. So first speaker, Professor Paul Kim, Chief Technology Officer of Stanford University and also Assistant Dean of Stanford Graduate School of Education. He has served as advisor on education and higher education institution issues for various organizations such as the Asian Development Bank and the National Science Foundation and the National Academies of Science. And he also founded the Seed of Empowerment, a non-profit organization funded by UNESCO. Professor Kim, can you please start off?
Sure, thank you, Dr. Kim. Let's see. Okay, you're looking at a photo of Afghanistan girls in Kabul. And as many of you know, the struggles these children had to face from their birth today are unimaginable. And they're still facing numerous challenges. The one most disheartening problem they are facing as we speak right now is their threatened right to education. On top of what has been the challenge for them for decades with all-time uncertainty, COVID-19 happened. Due to the current pandemic, their access to education has been completely shattered. When we complain about Zoom fatigue from so many Zoom meetings and classes, these students in Afghanistan have nowhere to go to continue to learn because their schools are all closed. In the midst of this chaotic situation, I received an email from one of my colleagues at Stanford asking me to meet a student who might be joining Stanford University as a graduate student. I learned that the student is an Afghan female who has been admitted to Stanford, Harvard, and Berkeley, yet she has not made up her mind. So my job was to convince her that Stanford is the right place for her. And as I learned about her by having a Zoom meeting, I began to be really impressed. She has shown a tremendous interest in helping young Afghanistan girls get an education. And in fact, she has traveled to several informal learning centers in and out of Kabul and helped teach young students. Currently, since all the schools are closed, she's communicating with her students via WhatsApp. Every week, she reads and records storybooks and shares her audio files along with the storybook files to their mobile phones. What an incredible use of technology. She has been providing the children with a basic education program to fight the crisis. And she asked me what she can expect to learn from our graduate program so she can apply to her lifelong passion for educating children in marginalized regions like Afghanistan, where these girls' right to education is threatened. I ensured that she would learn the big picture of education inequality around the globe with international competitive data sets and seminar works by notable researchers and partnering organizations. Then she asked me what I have been doing in the developing regions. So I began to explain what I've been doing in the past, how I put together mobile learning technology for indigenous migrant children working in farms in Mexico, also how I partnered with the global organizations to expand my mobile learning projects such as Pocket School to help entrepreneurship skills for girls in rural India, and how I conducted research studies by traveling with the graduate students and implementing literacy and numeracy programs in Africa. And also how I developed mobile learning technology to assess executive functioning skills of children in conflict zones such as Palestine. And lastly, how I developed an inquiry-based mobile learning program named SMILE with funding from UNESCO and other organizations to expand in different countries around the world. Then she asked me how I handled places where there's no reliable access to electricity or internet. So I explained about SMILE Pi or project and its solution, which uses a $35 Raspberry Pi loaded with SMILE learning management system, Wikipedia, Khan Academy, and a K-12 digital curriculum set, full computer coding schools, and STEM-related laboratories. The SMILE Pi runs on portable batteries, and it is your Wi-Fi router storage and content, everything in one small box. No reliable electricity or internet is needed in this case. Interestingly, our very recent research in 12 different countries shows that the 60% of schools are using WhatsApp and the rest are using printed papers to distribute learning materials to students, or nothing at all right now during this pandemic. So I think mobile learning may make a sense right now for those countries using WhatsApp. At any rate, the student then asked me if we could deploy a smart mobile learning project in Afghanistan right now. So I asked her, you mean right now? And she said, yes, right now, because there's no formal schooling right now in Afghanistan. And I said, why not? And she started to come up with plans to train local friends to serve as facilitators and line up weekly educational content with specific schedules. As we speak right now, she has been teaching her students and sending me progress report every week. I have to remind you that she hasn't even started at her class at Stanford, and yet she's making a difference already in the lives of many students in Afghanistan right now through a mobile learning model. Anyway, she has decided to join Stanford this fall. So I feel pretty good about that because I did my job. But more importantly, I feel great that there are individuals out there who want to make a difference for the children who are in dire need of access to education. Also, I'm glad that young millennials are seeking to join universities because they have a genuine passion for making an impact in our society, not because they want a piece of paper degree at the end. If you look at closely what just happened here, perhaps you may find a glimpse of the future of a higher education model where young students meet with their coaches to work on projects, even though they may be 1,000 miles away from each other. If in such a model, knowledge and experience are shared and solutions are designed and evaluated to address real world problems, what is the meaning of institutions and buildings in the future of education? In a time like right now, physical classroom buildings have very little values unless your class is dealing with expensive lab equipment. Overall, this calls for a new normal in the education ecosystem. In fact, this concept is not new at all. A while ago, I taught a MOOC named Designing a New Learning Environment, which invited 20,000 students from 170 different countries to come up with a new innovative designs to solve numerous education problems. In this massive class, every student had to be working in teams to identify, design, and evaluate solutions that address real-world education problems. Did I evaluate all 20,000 students' work? No, the platform had a machine learning algorithm developed to provide students with simulated evaluation experiences so they can turn around and evaluate their peers' work as if I were personally evaluating everyone's work. This kind of MOOC is a scaled-up version of coaching young individuals globally. This kind of learning environment is just one of the many things that people like me are trying to experiment as an attempt to innovate education. In addition, the rapid development of artificial intelligence is waiting around the corner to add a whole new dimension to the education ecosystem. I'm personally involved in developing an AI-backed coaching companion that can engage in conversations with the students and encouraging them to improve their personal inquiries. The difference between a human teacher and AI coach is that the machine never forgets a single word or question a student has ever mentioned. This is going to be quite revolutionary in my view. Now, let's step back and come to reality today. Regardless of COVID-19, many of the innovation attempts have been already made and many things have already been tried. However, these weren't valued much because there was always an offline option and people didn't want to invest time to learn new models involving technology or online environments when things seemed acceptable as always have been. Now with COVID-19, the all-time available offline model is no longer an ideal option as of today. The use of online education environments skyrocketed in developed countries, in developing regions as well. A tool like WhatsApp is a dominant learning management system right now. Nonetheless, there's an unprecedented level of training, development, and collaboration to launch and improve online learning environments rapidly. A lot of early research studies around online education are now coming back to the main stage discussions. It feels like we're going back to the future very fast. If COVID-19 lingers around long, the rate of development and innovation in education technology will probably accelerate at a rate we have never seen. Here's a word of caution though. As more online education is becoming a norm, schools and universities will have to figure out how to structure a better coaching system, not a lecture delivery system. Coaching means understanding students much better at an individual level and guiding them and motivating them to achieve their full potential. If you're still thinking of running a school or university by converting offline lectures into streaming videos and easing academic requirements, you're on the wrong track. You want to challenge your students based on their interests and skills with much more rigorous experiential education programs linked to solving real-world problems. This way, we'll be able to involve students from Afghanistan to Rwanda and from Seoul to Silicon Valley to work together to address global challenges in a global team. And that's how I see the future of education. I hope my presentation has given you some useful ideas to design future learning environments for your students. We'll certainly remember this period in human history as one of the most invigorating times of innovation. This time of now is a new renaissance moment in education, and we do not want to waste this crisis. We hate the virus, but we value the innovation trigger it created to our generation. So thank you for your interest and effort to make a difference together.
Thank you very much for such a moving story and also your very hard work to spread electronic devices to children of the developing world. OAPC actually is very much reminiscent of OLPC, one laptop per child, the most famous project to distribute similar devices to children of the world, developing world. Very interesting project. We're going to move right to the next presentation because as we discussed, we'll have all discussions at the end of the session. Our next speaker is Professor Taeok Lee, who led this KAIST initiative of educational innovation as President Shin introduced as Education 4.0, while serving as the former Dean of Education and also Dean of Library and Information Systems. He gave more than 100 keynotes and invited talks on Education 4.0, some of which were featured in Nature and other prominent outlets. For his long contribution to education innovations, he received very prominent award last year, Link Genesis Best Teacher Grand Prize, given to the most innovative teacher at KAIST. That's maybe all I can say.
Okay, thank you for a very long introduction. Hello, everyone. Today, I would like to suggest a very simple, very naive suggestion for our education. Okay, here we have an interesting example of defining a class by famous scholars. Okay, here you may see just a lot of question. Okay, it is quite different from our conventional classes. Okay, so nowadays many people are talking about the future talent. Okay, creativity, problem definition and solving, and critical thinking, and soft skills. Okay, but all these have some commons. They are very difficult to teach and evaluate their learning outcomes. And more important one, okay, they are not being taught in most universities. Okay, so it is very simple to understand what to do and how to do. But we have made many failures. Here, an example, okay. We have made failures to achieve real mission of the education. It's quite from our original expectation. Here, another example. Okay, McKinsey reported such kind of failures based on very extensive global survey. Okay, the point is our universities currently are not teaching those skills which are mostly wanted by the employee and employers. So conventional lecturing are making troubles. So then why do we have such failures? I think it is because of mass education, okay? But how do we have such a mass education system? I found that our mass education system was invented very intentionally long time ago. The key is with standardization and also our usual lecturing. So now we are imagining a new education. So we have tried to transform our mass education to quality education for a long time. However, it is not so easy. It is because of our very fixed mind and very strong resistance. It's not so easy. So here we have very critical and uncomfortable truths, okay? So students mostly learn from themselves by self-learning, not from professors lecturing. So you may know these two famous scholars, but they are also great teachers, okay? How did they teach their students, okay? They just helped their students to learn by themselves through a lot of questions. Sometimes they suggested some opinions and advices, but usually students make and find their own answers. However, we have lost all these best practices because of our mass education. At this time, we need to recall them. So now it is the time for reinventing our education. But I think it is only possible by eliminating the lecturing from our classroom. Okay? We are lucky now because of a very advanced and fast developing digital technology. We now can digitalize our lecturing and send them to the internet. Okay? And the technology and the methods they are now being improving. So then we can do everything in classroom, okay? Teamwork, more discussion, and so on. So then now we can redesign and reinvent our classes. So there have been many well-known good ideas of learning and teaching. These all innovative teaching and learning methods are designed for fostering future talent. Okay? So then we can implement these ideas in our classroom. So here we have a small evidence from KAIST. Okay. We transformed almost 9% of our classes to new types of teaching and learning. So we found it is very sustainable, or it can be even better. So then we can do very well without lecturing. So we have triggered digital transformation in our education. So lectures are now being actually transformed into digital self-learning content, commodities, and services by global publishers. Furthermore, the lectures are now being opened and shared to everyone in internet. So we can do much better in online learning and online classes. It can be more interactive. Students can participate. They can make some roles and they can learn by themselves. So even online learning can be nowadays very immersive, experiencing and creating, collaborating, customizing, and also economical and sustainable. Okay, all these new digital learning technologies, they are rapidly coming into our classroom. So, because of the global pandemic, okay, we are all experiencing online learning, okay? So, regardless of his intention, okay? But now we are realizing what online learning really are and should be. So, in order to achieve real digital transformation in our education, okay, there are many things to be done, okay? It will take a long time because of our fixed mind and very strong resistance. It will be very long and tough voyage. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Lee. I have seen him very closely struggling to expand and promote Education 4.0. So I'm very moved how hard he has been thinking about future of classrooms, future of learning, and future of teaching. Our next speaker is Mr. Anthony Salcedo from Microsoft. Mr. Salcedo joined Microsoft in 1992. He was at the center of Microsoft's involvement in the creation of the School of the Future, which is a pioneering partnership with the school district of Philadelphia. And now it's the first of many schools that Microsoft is operating, which is known as showcase schools. As Vice President of Education at Microsoft, Mr. Salcedo leads the execution of the company's vision for education. One thing I'd like to point out in his activities is daily adventures. It's not A, but E, adventures, which is a series of online interviews of visionaries, experts, and leaders in the higher education sector. I really recommend you take time to check it out. So please, can you go ahead?
Well, thank you so much. It's really great to be here with such distinguished speakers on such an important topic. As we've been working at Microsoft, we've been working to help schools shift to digital since early December in response to COVID-19. But this has been, in many ways, decades in making as it relates to technology's role in education. It's been said many times before, and certainly on this conversation, that the world is changing. This is nothing new. The world has changed in every century, every decade. The difference, frankly, the unprecedented nature of COVID-19 is both the ubiquity of the change as well as the rapid shift that happened. This has absolutely been true with the shift with technology. Many of the things that we're seeing, many of the debates and rhetorics that we've been having in this meeting have been had for decades as it relates to technology's role, the role of blended and online learning, the dynamics of how we can teach with digital resources, address inequity across the world. These are issues that have just been intensified and amplified in a COVID response. It's been important, though, to reflect on the heroic journey that has happened in just very few months. Faculty members who were resistant of technology were forced to embrace. I've been working with school leaders and teachers for really 20 years, overcoming a very simple barrier. Teachers around the world, many of them, a very high percentage, believed technology's rise would diminish their value. What we saw in very quick time in COVID-19 response is not only did the world embrace technology as a place to connect and support students on their learning journey, but the role of educators was enhanced and appreciated. While we were remotely learning, we didn't lose interest in gathering together physically and expressing our humanity, whether it's the joy of connecting on a remote conference, but also the desire to get back together and in classrooms. And this balance is what we've got to embrace going forward. It's not about turning remote learning on and off, but embracing this as a concept for the work we do in and out of classrooms. In many ways, technology has been thought as a tool to acquire to support the journey inside schools and inside campuses. What we've seen in COVID-19 response is that technology's true value is extended beyond the schools and classroom. And as we think and often overthink the role of technology, the place of technology, the training that we need to support online, blended, and remote learning scenarios, we need to now start shifting our attention in the value, the purpose of our classrooms when we're back together face to face. Because we'll not ever shut off remote learning and hybrid learning as an opportunity for students to extend learning options beyond the classroom. And we need to have more thoughtfulness on the value proposition and what we use purposefully when we're gathered together inside classrooms. This is a significant piece of work that I think has been under-focused as the attention is shifted, as it often does, to technology. As we've seen throughout the last several years with technology's rise and lack or success in pockets around the world, the differentiator has been mindset. Embracing the right mindset about the change, bringing optimism and energy as you think through the journey is critical, and it's going to be critical for leaders embracing the shift. We've been spending time thinking about the future of higher education, the role of universities, the value of degree, etc. But we've got to start pivoting on the reality of the world that's changed. The digital future that we knew we were preparing students for has gotten even more intensified. The skills gaps that we have in place in many parts of the world have grown because of the reliance on digital technologies in business. This is an opportunity for universities to embrace their incredibly important role to prepare students for the future. And that's something that we're excited to see. And it's been mentioned several times in this meeting, the foundation of skills as it relates to the reason why students are in university to prepare them for a workplace, whether they're remote or in classroom, is going to be the foundation for the change that's needed as we move forward. There are a range of skills that address a workplace that, although we consider it the digital revolution in Industrial Revolution 4.0, this is a workplace that's about human skills. It's about the ability to connect with others, to share, collaborate beyond borders, cultures, but to make work happen in that environment requires humanity. The value that we can get inside universities and what we'll need to learn to deliver in a virtual world when we work and embrace hybrid learning. We've been working through a digital transformation in many institutions, and that's important and needed going forward. But we need to balance our influence and focus on people transformation and the cultural transformation that are all equal parts of this journey. In many cases, I'm engaged directly because of the work at Microsoft on digital transformation. As institutions and governments spun up rapid remote learning environments, we saw countries provisioning millions of students on Microsoft Teams for remote learning and blended learning scenarios in a matter of days. But we recognize the importance of embracing people transformation with readiness, preparedness, mindset development, and thinking through the culture, one of purpose, one of connectivity across the institution, and removing the negativity and focusing on the optimism to ensure that students are realizing their full potential. As we work with institutions around the world, we've recognized that we've got to be holistic in this journey. It's not about one piece of technology. It's not about one policy or readiness that we support with faculty, but thinking collectively about the university. There's a number of reasons for this. One, increasingly we're going to see the need of universities to leverage a much more connected thinking as it relates to both the mission of an institution as it relates to the value proposition for students, the way in which they integrate technology to reduce complexity and improve the effectiveness of data and AI, and the need for us to bring those technologies together to make really amazing things possible in a new world of cloud computing. This is something that we're working with as part of the higher education transformation framework. And we have frameworks for K through 12 and libraries and museums as well that really refine the journey to help school leaders make this transition possible, regardless of the technology they use. We've seen amazing examples from Tech Milan, who really embraced with the Flex application, the power of AI to provide purposeful learning journeys to help students identify skills that they'll need to prepare for this new workplace in a constantly changing environment. They're applying AI to help students on that journey. We've seen great examples and really showcase examples from Dr. Kellerman and the University of New South Wales in Sydney, and really New South Wales in general, on embracing tools to help expand the ability to connect with students. This was happening pre-COVID, and it's just expanded in a post-COVID and COVID world that we're living in now, where Dr. Kellerman is engaging with his students using a wide variety of tools like Microsoft Stream, Microsoft Teams, and OneNote to break down the walls of collaboration and communication and make the time together in classroom more valuable. We're seeing amazing activity in Korea, and Microsoft is super proud of our partnership with the Korean Education Broadcast System, which in many ways defines Korea's technology transformation from the early days of radio to now what has scaled over 1,500% in a matter of 6 days to support over 3 million students with remote learning. There's tremendous examples like that, and that was powered really by the flexibility of our new technology platform, Microsoft Azure, and the cloud environments that many institutions and universities now have as a capacity for them to embrace change at a larger scale than ever before. It's less about the debate of how do we see the future of higher education or the value of higher education. The value is in preparing students for a changing future, to align the greatness that we have in our universities around the world to help students realize their potential. Technology is one part of a piece, but we've got to embrace leaders and the culture change that make that possible. And I want to salute all of you for leading the way in this unprecedented time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Salcido. It's very impressive observation and comment that it's not just the digital transformation, but also people and culture transformations are what really matter, especially in terms of mindsets instead of just a list of technologies that enable the future of education. So now we are halfway through the session. Our next speaker is Mr. Ben Nelson, founder, chairman, CEO of Minerva, created in 2011. And I guess I don't need any further introduction. But as you know, Minerva School is not just another elite university. It actually remains the most selective university and also known as harder to get into compared to even Harvard, which has the acceptance rate of 2% compared to 5% of Harvard. Anyway, so let's welcome Mr. Nelson. And also, as you might know, he had this idea of a new type of a university when he was studying as a freshman in economics. So that's another possibility of why we should be really caring about these freshman students in the age of COVID-19, because the freshmen are not really having full freshman year these days. Okay, can you go ahead?
Please, thank you. Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I am in Korea often. I usually come to South Korea at least 3 or 4 times a year, and so it's a strange time for me to be addressing you remotely, but I do think it is illustrative. It's illustrative of both the challenges and the opportunities that we all face. Now, I am not actually in the habit of making predictions. I think that generally making predictions about the future is a fool's errand. We use the models that we understand and know in our lives and in our day-to-day, whereas the reality is that education, society, technology, they're all shaped by factors that pop up unexpectedly, that cause waves of transformation that we can't predict. But I will wager one very bold prediction that comes in two parts. Part one is that COVID will seemingly have no impact on higher education whatsoever. Prediction number two is that COVID will change higher education forever. Now, why is that? How can you have both? How can COVID seemingly have no impact whatsoever on higher education, but then ultimately change it? Well, let me try to explain that in just a few minutes. I've talked to dozens of the world's leading university presidents and provosts over the past 2 or 3 months. And some are honest about the predicament that they are facing. Others, let's say, are practicing some version of magical realism and wishful thinking. But the reality is that the temporary setback of COVID, because it will be temporary in a sense, we all hope we will develop a vaccine, we all hope that it won't mutate to a point where this is our new normal. But most people look at this as a blip. And overwhelmingly, even though some forward-thinking presidents or provosts or even deans or certain professors would like to change what their universities will do, the reality is when they look around their faculties, when they look around their institution, the majority wants to go back to the way everything used to be. And so they may, in the short term, offer classes on Zoom or online. They'll do a terrible job, as they've done last spring, that is. And then they'll say, you see, look at the statistics. Technology doesn't work, right? So we can go back to the extant, to what we're used to, and everything will be fine. Here's the one problem with that. The problem is that the extant is less effective at providing an education than a placebo is at curing a disease. The traditional educational infrastructure that we have, the test and lecture-based method, which is still to this day the vast majority of credits issued by universities, even at the most elite universities in the world, has a 6-month success rate of 10% or less. That means that at the end of a semester course, delivered offline, delivered by the best quote unquote professors, the highest rated, the ones that the students want to take classes with, in the best case, if you go and test students 6 months after the end of that semester and see how much they retained, they've forgotten 90% of what they got correct on their final exam. This is a statistic and a fact that we have known for more than 30 years. But higher education doesn't care about that. Higher education is protected. It's a regulated sector. If you want to be a doctor, a lawyer, a veterinarian, an engineer, you have no option but to go through an accredited university system. And universities believe that this protects them and enables them to focus on other things. But President Tan from NUS, said something very interesting and identified the kinds of skills that universities all know they should be teaching. But he also acknowledged that there is great difficulty in teaching these skills. In fact, if you look at university success, and I'm looking at the very best universities in the world, their success at actually teaching students their ability to think critically, solve problems creatively, to solve major problems, have broad transferable skills, the success rate is even worse than the lectures. Universities are simply not set up to do that. But that is where technology comes in. At Minerva, now for the better part of a decade, we have managed from our very first class onward to demonstrate learning gains that no university has ever been able to demonstrate in an offline environment. We have greater efficacy using our approach and the platform that we've developed than is available in any online modality, but more so in any offline modality. Because technology, when used not to just do what you do offline, online, but poorly, but to rethink what is possible in education and deliver a higher quality outcome. When technology is used in that way, it is transformative. Now, given that universities have known the flaws of their own system for decades, and given that the reality is that most universities will go through this period as a blip, but they will get funding from governments, they will weather the storm, maybe some will shut down, the students in those institutions will go and support the others. Given that dynamic, why do I think that COVID will forever change higher education? And I would liken this to an earthquake that happens deep on the ocean floor. We don't really feel that earthquake. We don't even notice it. But under the right conditions, it builds a tsunami that, if it makes landfall, wipes away everything. And that same phenomenon is happening right now. If we believe in education, if we believe that transferable practical knowledge is the differentiation between those individuals who will be successful in life versus not, and since we see the data that demonstrates that universities in their current incarnation do not do that, we realize that this opportunity will enable more and more programs to begin in a new modality with a new offering that is vastly superior and, by the way, more cost-effective and more accessible than the existing structure of education and higher education. With time, graduates of those programs will start taking the jobs that traditional Ivy League graduates had access to. The more employers see the outcome from those types of programs, the more they will shift their hiring away from traditional programs into new ones. And eventually, governments themselves, seeing that their business people, politicians, computer software engineers, etc., are coming from these non-traditional programs, will say, wait a second, wouldn't I rather have a doctor and a lawyer and a veterinarian that's trained in the same way? And when the government will then remove the oligopoly of power from universities, those that cling to the past will be destroyed. And so the opportunity that universities have right now is to embrace this change, not because it will threaten their institution in the next 2 or 3 years, but because if they don't, the ecosystem of alternative providers will threaten that ecosystem 5 to 10 years from now.
Okay, thank you very much for your very insightful, very visionary speech. Given that COVID-19 is not another once-a-decade crisis, but rather it's once-a-century crisis, I guess your analogy of COVID-19 to sort of tsunami really makes really great sense. Okay, our second to the last speaker, Mr. Phil Betty, Chief Technology Officer of Times Higher Education, is going to make the presentation. But we had a summit last year with the Times Higher Education, so we are very close friend organizations now. And THE is, of course, best known as the company doing this university ranking, but it's much more than that. So maybe he can give a little bit of introduction of that organization, but also let me just mention that Mr. Bhatti, in fact, was very much instrumental in devising the current metric or method of the world university rankings, having 24 experience in the higher education sector. We actually know each other very closely. So, hi, Phil, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you, and thank you very much for having me here. We did indeed have a wonderful conference together in Daejeon not too long ago, so I'm very sorry I'm not with you in person, but I'm extremely happy to get up at 1 a.m. in the morning, especially for KAIST. We have such a good friendship. So yes, as you mentioned, sorry, I'm just trying to move my slides forward. Actually, they seem to be frozen. Here we go. As you mentioned, we're probably best known for the world university rankings, but of course we are a data and an insights business. And one of the things that I'm particularly proud of at Times Higher Education is our connections, our connectivity. We bring people together through events and pull insights from the experts. So today I'm going to actually reveal exclusively the results of a university leaders survey that we have conducted very recently. This is not out until tomorrow, so this is a world exclusive. I'll probably be in trouble with the editor of Times Higher Education for revealing this, but we have a survey of 200 leaders from 53 countries across 6 continents carried out after the coronavirus pandemic hit between April and May this year. And that's all available on timeshighereducation.com from tomorrow. But I think we may find some of that conservatism and magical realism that Ben talked about in this survey, but it does hint at how people have adjusted and are predicting the future from a leadership level across the world. I think the first thing to note, of course, is that of these leaders, they had all, of course, been forced to transition rapidly online. I think there's a really interesting sense of how much that has been different in terms of perceptions of success. The orange bars here ask the question, was the transition a technical success? And I think there's a fairly high levels of confidence in Europe, Oceania and the United Kingdom. 50% plus were saying it was a technical success, but actually much less confidence in East Asia. Japan, China, and East Asia more generally have not been quite as comfortable with the success of the transition. The blue bars represent a slightly different question. Did they feel that quality is as good as in-person teaching? We heard from Bahram earlier on suggesting very emphatically that face-to-face is best and online is inferior, but actually quite a large number of leaders did say that they feel confident the transition was successful, the quality had been maintained. Low in Oceania, but I guess that might be because the transition was very rapid. They were the first to be hit. They were actually teaching at the time the crisis hit, but actually as high as 60% plus in parts of South Asia and Europe. But I think there is some real positives here in terms of, yes, there's a conservative element of thinking around this. It couldn't possibly replace our traditional campus model of face-to-face, but there were some real signs, as we heard from Dr. Lee earlier in this session, actually, that the technology has actually allowed certainly some East Asian universities to see greater student engagement. Chiu Yong, the president of Tsinghua University, told Times Higher Education that actually the introduction of screens weren't barriers, they were actually bridges. They'd actually improved student engagement. Japanese university president in the survey told us that perhaps technology is helping overcome traditional shyness among students, that they did actually see more interaction, more student engagement after they transitioned online. So I think there's some real optimism there around protecting quality and preserving quality. But I think it's really important, that, as we've discussed before, to say this is really has not been a question of a short-term temporary solution to a pressing crisis. This is something that will change things longer term. The orange bar examines people's predictions around the increased use of blended learning. You can see 100% of the presidents in Australia said they will absolutely be increasing blended learning over 5 years, not just a short-term blip over a longer, medium-term period. Close to 100% in Europe feel absolutely they'll be transitioning to a blended learning environment in that sort of shorter to medium-term environment. UK, North America as well. Blue is looking at 100% online delivery, and many institutions do feel, of course, they will have to be much more proactive in offering fully online degrees to varying extents across the world. But what does this all mean? What do they think this means? I think this harks back to what Ben was saying. It does perhaps reflect some magic realism, some conservative thinking. First of all, no one believes this is in any way going to improve their finances. The big tradition online is not a question of saving costs. If anything, it's more expensive to provide the blended learning. Very few people report they think they will need fewer academic staff, fewer professional staff. So this idea that, robots will suddenly take over, or a captured lecture could be used across, a mass production line of reaching students. There's still that individualism, that intellectual property that the academics bring. That's very much something the sector wants to protect. But the magic realism, I think, is perhaps the limited number who believe that this transition will drive down tuition fees. There's a great hope it won't affect how we price education, but I do think the level of disruption that might come and the move to a buyer's market in terms of student recruitment may well force more change than these presidents are liking to admit, at least in the short term, and for the period of the survey. One of the things that's interesting, they don't seem to think they'll reduce staff or they'll need to cut tuition fees, but actually there's an extraordinarily alarming number of presidents in marketized systems that believe that there will be market failure. You can see here more than 80% of the presidents in the United Kingdom are predicting bankruptcies, literally universities closing due to the failure of their position. Post-coronavirus, 90% in North America. That compares very closely to North America, where there's a similar situation. But actually, you can see a very, very different perception of market failure in those systems that aren't marketized, so surprisingly so. But the orange bars show perceptions of increased government support. And again, I think you can start to see a real east-west divide here. More skepticism, more concern in the UK, Europe, America, that we may see a reduction in government support as a result of the economic fallout for universities, but much less concern in China, Japan, and East Asia. Fewer than 10% in China feel government support will drop. And I think that could lead to a really interesting shifting or a speeding up of what I think is already apparent. This slight balancing back towards East Asia from the West. You've seen national responses to the coronavirus. The rise of nationalism has led presidents to predict that fewer students will want to study in places like the US and the UK for health reasons, for reasons of perceived racism. You've seen China getting much more geopolitically active in terms of where they recommend students go, suggesting they shouldn't go to Australia, for example. This is leading to predictions from the sector leaders that there will be brain gain in parts of the world, certainly Southern Asia. But I think this shift in the balance of power in the knowledge economy from west to east will accelerate here. Those dependencies on international students, for example, from the west will be really hit hard. Another sort of very significant outcome, I think, is the disruption that presidents are predicting. I do think there's conservatism here, but there's clearly an understanding that the models will shift, the business model will change, and the disruption is coming. One president talked about corporations becoming real competitors. Will we see more of Zoom University emerging, the private sector wanting to get heavily involved in delivery, not just delivery, but also accreditation of higher education. Lots more tech investment, of course, but also sort of the market shakeout, the rise of mega universities, more mergers, more federations. Some of these predictions of an airline model of very large international collaborative organizations could well be one of the outcomes. Another thing I think is going to really drive forward here is this sense that the customer's always right, the sense of consumer power, the sense there's a buyer's market, so the need for universities to be way more flexible. One president predicted a much more credit-based system, credit accumulation, transfer, people dipping in and out of their education, lifelong learning, of course, economic fallout, really suggesting new ways of accessing learning, with people needing to upskill and rethink their skills much more profoundly. So much more customization, much more flexibility, and of course this sense of really needing to differentiate the offer and look hard at costs. I think the cost of delivery, the cost in terms of the students' perception will be put under a lot of pressure. Two final points really. One is, will we see a dramatic rethinking of brand power? Universities often, sit on their centuries of reputation, their huge positions in terms of global super brands. I think there is a sense that students will really rethink, looking much more at the actual content of the education, not the setting, not the brand, the environment they're in. And I think another final point to make really is just that we will, I think, as has been touched upon by Ben and others, this does hasten the idea of not just looking at how we teach and how we deliver teaching, but actually what we are teaching. This crisis, one president said, makes us conscious of what is fundamental, not only in teaching and learning, but also in our own life, the power of communication, importance of empathy and respect for others. So a real accelerant to driving what it is we actually want to impart to our students in terms of skills, transferable skills for the future. So that's just a taster in terms of what the sector's thinking, what the university presidents think, and I hope it just helps open things up to the conversation that we'll have at the end of the presentation. So thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to listening to the rest of the session.
Thank you, Phil, especially for sharing the results before it is being released tomorrow. In fact, because the THE is doing all this ranking, and also you have been in charge of this metric, it just occurs to me that maybe after COVID-19, probably this metric might have to be revised in terms of how universities are taking care of educational innovations, given that they are struggling in terms of budget constraint, other resources. So that's just some suggestion I came across while listening to your presentation. Anyway, we will do more discussion later. And finally, our last speaker is Mr. Jaewon Kim, co-founder and CEO of ELLIS. It's E, not A, ELLIS, which is a very well-known and kind of a rising star, a startup providing coding education platform in South Korea. Mr. Kim earned master's degree from KAIST. Oh, we are very proud. Okay, and also from Technical University of Berlin. He also worked as a research intern at Harvard University and also worked at Apple and also NVIDIA, the company inventing GPU. So let's just introduce him. And
Hi. Thank you for the introduction, and I'm Jaewon Kim, CEO of ELLIS, programming learning platform. So just to briefly, I'm very honored to introduce our case study at this forum. And our co-founders have started this company during graduate school at KAIST, and so we're still PhD candidate. We haven't got the degree yet, and we are not dropouts yet, but we are working hardly on the ELLIS company. So Just to briefly introduce, when we are TAs for computer science courses, we have found 3 major problems. First, many institutions have hard time operating computer labs. Educators have hard time providing feedback because, as you know, all the students have very creative codes when they submit because all the answers are different. So it's hard to understand students' code and provide the feedback. So because of that, students have very difficulties completing computer science courses, and it's the lowest completion rate by far on the courses at KAIST. So we have developed a data-driven and interactive programming learning platform, and that have main features of live programming environments. So educators can create programming exercises on our platform in containerized virtual environment. With that exercises, students can access and program at any time and anywhere, and they can complete the exercises. Our dashboard actually has very detailed information about student progress. Not only their scores or performances, but we also have very micro level, keystroke level data that we can track on how students are progressing. With the dashboard data, we analyze the student progress and we give like AI-assisted tutoring features. For example, we have a lot of data, so 20 different features of student learning progress, and we predict who are likely to fail. So with the students who are likely to fail, TAs or teachers can give feedback before they drop out. So we have these kind of data provided to the TAs. With the data, how we interact is through the chats or through the help center. So before post-pandemic, we've actually used the platform in offline settings, so we haven't used the chats a lot. But after the pandemic, the use of chats and interactivity inside the platform has just continued to increase a lot. So at last, we provide this whole platform for different organizations as custom domain and custom platform. The reason is that all different institutions have different ways of teaching and different policies of teaching. So we provide the platform to customize based on their needs and based on their operations. So we provide this whole platform, programming learning platform, to different institutions, and they can customize at their will. So we've collected a lot of data. We've collected like over 400 million code revisions, code submissions, and we provide different programming languages. And just like Coursera Labs, we provided different kinds of hands-on exercises for the past 5 years. So this is some of the case study that we've figured out during this platform. When we saw how student program, we figured out that student code more on Tuesday, not Monday or Wednesday, but they code more on Tuesday. And they obviously code a lot before the homework deadline, but they also code a lot before the midterm. So it's not just the homework they try to code a lot, but it's just before the tests they try to re-code and re-figure out their codes. Now, with all these submissions inside our platform, we can kind of detect the clusters of codes, similarity of the codes. Currently, we are using this to identify the plagiarism. So we constantly figure out like 60 students who are candidate of plagiarism, and yeah, at the end, we do give 10 students of failures. But with this kind of feature, we're not trying to give negative effects to the students, but furthermore, at the end, we try to give some kind of positive reinforcement for students. For example, if students have similar codes, then we can kind of give similar learning methods to those who have similar problems or similar codes structures. So with this kind of detailed data, we are trying to cluster students' progress and give proper feedback for those group of students. So we also have a lot of different research about online settings. So we have gathered online groups during machine learning online class that has held in 2016, and we obviously figured out that individual learning setting is less effective than the group learning, but we figured out how far it's better than just the individual learning. So we've grouped social learning with a bunch of TAs and students, and we figured out completion rate has increased twice more than just the individual setting. So even in the online setting, if you have the group of students together, interactive and all that, then you can figure out how much and how far completion rate can increase. Furthermore, we've identified a lot of different pedagogy for programming exercises, whether they've implementing or they're debugging or they're refactoring. We identify different steps where students are, and we try to give proper feedback at the right stage. So we have researched a lot of education settings with our platform, and that has been adopted to a lot of universities and companies in Korea. So companies in Korea started to adopt digital transformation courses, and because of different companies have different kinds of level of understanding, we had to customize a lot of our courses online. So some of the companies can easily pick up computer science Python courses in a month or two, but some companies have struggled to pick up in 6 months. So we had to develop a customized courses for different companies. It's not just one course that can provide to different companies because of their different levels. So universities, our platform have been used for more than 5 years at KAIST, and we have tests on MIT. The case study is that currently software or machine learning AI are used in different departments. It's not just the computer science that's teaching computer science or AI, it's a different department that's trying to adopt these courses to their department. And they often struggle to hand out these programming exercises or give some kind of a midterm for programming exercises. So our platform helps or supports the TAs and professors to manage and operate the programming exercises. Lastly, we have adopted our courses to various companies, not just few employees, but like more than 10,000 of employees in finance or in services like chipset services and a lot of different manufacturers. So they've tried to pick up introduction courses, and they're trying to develop their courses into their own fields. So for example, in manufacturing, they want to improve the quality of the manufacturers, and they want to analyze those data, and we had to customize our courses to do so. So it's not just subjects that can teach each employees, but we also customize all the courses to finally like provide the project that employees can actually put the project on their company. So to conclude all our case studies, when we figure out all the different domains and different institutions, they all struggle to do digital transformation. So they know how digital transformation is going to change their institutions or companies, but they don't really know how to operate or how to manage or even how to just measure the progress of all the employees or students. Our platform actually have detailed information, so that way we can guide HRs or we can guide professors to acknowledge where the students are and how to customize the courses and provide the personalized computer science courses. So yeah, time is almost up, and it's very honored again to present our work at this forum, and we hope to discuss further more on this pandemic changes, and we can hopefully contribute our journey with all the great keynote speakers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kim. Although I'm not an engineer and not very close to AI, but still the way you design this service or platform seems to be very different from some similar services, because this is not only for users or students learning something, but also it's a great tool for teachers and also tutors, TAs. This is going to be alleviating a lot of a burden from their teaching work. But so we are running actually 20 minutes behind the schedule. So the remaining discussion session, I would say we just cut it down to maybe 15 minutes. But each speaker presented so much thoughts and information and data, so it's really hard to give one or two questions. There are many, many, many. I guess at least so far I have gathered, it's not just my own questions, but to prepare for this discussion, I have actually collected the questions from many people here. So there are many, but I guess they could be sorted into some 2 or 3 at large. So I'll just introduce those questions or comments, but then I'd suggest that probably this is going to be very short discussion. So my suggestion is I'm going to just spread all the questions, comments, and then each speaker can address some of these comments, or each speaker can actually choose to ask another speaker or give comments on another presentation. So it's wholly up to you, but let me just start with a few questions. So the demise of universities, as also mentioned in our welcome remarks, has been made, this prediction has been made so long, maybe more than several decades. So the question is, why universities fail to disappear? So I just came across an interesting expression. It's not universities disappear, but why they fail to disappear. In other words, after COVID-19, about 500 to 1,000 colleges in the US are expected to really disappear, actually be closed because of financial problems. So it's not just financial problems, but also all other these tsunami-like changes. So it's a very fundamental question. Again, going back to Mr. Nelson's observation that we have actually 2 contrary predictions. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on this very long-lasting question. Maybe related to that question, whether we really need a physical campus, because everything is just locked down everywhere. So what's the meaning of living on campus, teaching on campus? But then on the other hand, we learn not by studying, reading, writing, but also we learn by doing, we learn by playing. So still we may need some physical space. So that's a lot of questions, and also related to tuition and fees, because about 30 to 40% of universities around the world are very much tuition dependent. So if universities don't provide some interesting facilities like gyms or libraries and other facilities, students have to pay all the tuition. And already there is actually a lawsuit going on in North Carolina, and also even in Korea, we are facing this question, what this tuition is actually for, right? And then another big question is, in fact, this is just KAIST Herald that I picked up yesterday. So we are starting the final week next week, and it's a time of final day, like semester, final week of exams. And then plagiarism, all kind of inventive plagiarism going on, even online. So the question is, how do we evaluate when we fully go online for education? And even the more fundamental question is, do we really need to evaluate students or what about relative versus absolute evaluation? So that's partly philosophical, also partly technical questions. I can keep going on, but the final set of questions really are about the nature of technologies in transforming the higher education sector, because we have been talking about technological innovation many, many times for a long time. But then, as one of the speakers pointed out, education, like medicine, education is the most highly regulated sector. That's maybe the reason why we have not seen dramatic innovations despite all the potentials of technologies, especially in this digital transformation. So that's some of the questions, although we have actually many. So let me just start in the order of a presentation. So as I said, you can address some of these questions, or you can just give a kind of a final remark. So we're going to start with Professor Kim.
Thank you. Made some notes here about the questions that I just heard. In terms of the universities disappearing, I would say that when you look at the whole higher education ecosystem, some universities definitely will not be able to adapt to the changes that we're experiencing now. And if they do not evolve, probably they will face extinction. And I think that will come very quickly for those universities that are focused a lot on teaching only. But the universities that are centered around research, we're probably not going to have that sort of problem because of the lab equipment and then the laboratories and all those things that you really need to continue to do your research anyway. So overall, I think that universities that have resilient environment to create knowledge and to explore scientific phenomena, they will not have much problems during this pandemic or even after the pandemic. And in terms of the evaluation, and this is something that I share a lot, I always do not like to evaluate students' work based on their grades anyway. I always emphasize the importance of evaluating student work based on their impact in the society that they are in. So I think we would probably have to change about the grading criteria and then academic objectives and so forth. And this is a perfect time and trigger to rethink about the future of higher education. So I'm sure with the resilient mindset and freedom to explore, we'll be able to do that. And that's what the universities are good at. I'm not saying all universities, but some of the universities that have been doing a good job anyway will continue to do that.
Thank you very much. I'm not going to give any further comment in the interest of time. So Professor Lee, do you have any final comments?
Okay, thank you for everyone. Very many good stimulating ideas. But I think at this time we are agreeing with some common ideas, okay? So it is the time for changing our education, okay? Second, we can change, okay? So we can do much better in online learning, okay? We have had three strong beliefs, okay? One is the lecturing is a must for learning, even for teaching. And second one is online learning is just lecturing on internet, and online learning is a much worse, less interactive than the offline learning. But all these beliefs they are being broken, okay? So now we can imagine and we can design new education teaching and learning methods, okay? Then I personally believe in the future, the online learning may be primary teaching and learning, and offline learning or offline classes might be supporting or secondary one, okay? We have very different ideas, okay? I think at this time we should try. Thank you.
Thank you. Next. Next, Mr. Sasito.
Yeah, certainly. First off, I love the fact that you flipped the question in terms of looking at it in terms of why are universities resilient? Universities have existed for hundreds of years, and I think it's a little bit foolish to say the system is going to collapse in a matter of months. I think in many ways there will be universities that will shut as a result of COVID, but there were universities shutting prior to that because of economic dynamics and value for money. Look at the industries that close every year and the dynamics and transitions that's happening in the world of work. And I think we'd see very similar parallels. So universities are not immune to change and will need to adapt. But I think for the most part, the system is stable because the needs for advanced degrees is high. As Mr. Kim highlighted, the emerging technologies that require physical connections, the dynamics of quantum computing, which will become critical in our world and is already emerging, requires the work that's already going on university campus. We've seen it on the other spectrum with vocational education and the need to get together with materials to help build skills. Things like augmented and virtual reality will play a role, but certainly not pervasive enough in the short term to render the physical need to get connected to equipment and systems real. On the technology side, I certainly think one of the realities that we have to do as we expand our canvas for remote learning, we need to get much more focused on the dynamics of assessment, the shift on seat time, and certainly this needs to start very, very early in the system. If we embrace blended learning and learning beyond the classroom, the way in which we think of K through 12 or primary and secondary education certainly needs to evolve from a system that was defined by resource constraint and created on a model of time to align to those resource constraints. We've now seen anywhere, anytime learning become pervasive and ubiquitous, and the way in which we assess and what we assess needs to evolve. We also need to use data more actively to drive much more personalized learning and purposeful learning experience for students. We have ability now that students are participating more online and learning beyond the classroom to provide data insight to help a learner progress their journey and create a much more flexible and dynamic learning progression where mastery and connection to skills for employability becomes the driving engine for learning versus, in many ways, an archaic assessment model that was put in place for resources that no longer are constrained today.
Thank you. Oh, well, just one quick comment I got from our KAIST engineering professor is maybe PowerPoint, which is the signature product of Microsoft, most widely used in classrooms, may be redesigned to facilitate interactive teaching, because right now it's very much one-directional, and that's just a tip I got from
PowerPoint online. So we added abilities to do collaboration and actually remote learning in the classroom within PowerPoint, but in most cases, we're using our collaborative platform like Teams integrated with PowerPoint to do very much what the professor is highlighting.
That's very good to know. So next, Mr. Nelson.
Well, you asked a lot of questions. I'll perhaps give you a high-level response that I think connects most of them. The resiliency I talked about, it's a regulated industry, and I think the statistic that is perhaps lost on people is that if you ask 100 students entering a university in the United States that declare that they will be doctors, meaning they're going into a pre-med track, of those 100 students, only 5 will eventually practice medicine. The other 95 won't. And for most of them, they had no reason to go into a regulatory environment, but they didn't know that as 18-year-olds. And so until you have regulatory reform, you're not going to have university reform because they'll be able to hide behind that reality. Now, it may be that the most creative, brightest, best folks will go elsewhere, And that's in many ways beginning to happen in other areas. So as an example, I was at a CEO breakfast of Silicon Valley CEOs 10 years ago. And one of the CEOs, at the end, it was just a round table, there were 12 of us, and one of the people said, hey, you know, I'm giving a talk on education. He was not in education technology, I was the only one that was. And he says, well, I just want to do a survey of you in the room. You get a resume, and on the resume, you see a top 3 MBA program. So Harvard, Stanford, Wharton, MBA. You're the hiring manager, you're the CEO. Is that for you neutral, negative, or automatic do not hire? Now, notice that among those choices, there was no positive or good. It was only a range between neutral and catastrophic. And the reality is that many of the degrees, and again, this is not second tier MBA, this isn't third tier, this is from the very top. Now, when we went around, I said neutral. I said, well, you know, I don't really care where somebody went to school, I care what they've done, right? That's kind of irrelevant. 3 people said it's a negative, 7 said it was an automatic do not hire. That it was a sign of poor judgment that the individual went and pursued that kind of degree. Now, an MBA is not required for any job on the planet. It's not regulatory protected. And there's a crisis in the MBA, much like there is a crisis even in some regulatory protected fields, because there is a questioning of the value of those degrees. And so the more that that occurs, the more that these things will teeter. And because of the financial situation of even some relatively well-endowed institutions, because of the huge amount of fixed costs, more institutions are financially vulnerable than one might expect.
Okay. Thank you. It's going to take another night to discuss all the things. But then, and Phil?
Thank you. I'll probably just touch on a couple of those, because as Ben said, there's a huge amount to get your teeth into there. I think on the issue of the demise of universities, my sense is that I think there's no question that institutions will fail as a result of this crisis. They'll be exposed for being over-dependent, for example, on international student fee income. That's really been highlighted in Australia, in the United Kingdom in particular. Some surprisingly well-known institutions genuinely in trouble with the immediate drops in income from fees. That's partly a result of a heavily marketized system, and I think perhaps also a growing instrumentalism in how we evaluate the power of education in terms of graduate salaries and the cost-benefit analyses that obviously governments have to go through. But I think whilst institutions will fail, the institution of a university will never fail. It survived 800-900 years in Europe, longer in other cultures. And I think there is something just fundamentally vital to society about an institution that does combine pure research and teaching, and in a multidisciplinary way. I think there is something genuinely worth venerating about the pursuit of truth, the way that scholars will come together into communities and create new knowledge together. And I think universities do that in a unique way that a corporate wouldn't be able to achieve, combining R&D with teaching. That's the teaching environment that's informed by new knowledge and scholarship taking place. And increasingly, I think in the fourth industrial revolution, the crossing of boundaries, the coming together of a philosopher and an anthropologist in the same team as a biomedical scientist or whoever, it's going to be more and more important to cross disciplinary boundaries. And so those fundamental truth-seeking bodies will always prevail. I think the problem I think is going to emerge is who has access to those institutions. Are they left to a privileged few who still venerate the on-campus experience, the dreaming spires, the cloistered quadrangles? Is that something that's left to perhaps more privileged people? And there's a lot of social capital associated with that, a lot of brand association with being in that environment, who you meet, rather than what you actually learn. So the institution, I think, will survive for another 900 years, but I think it does have to rethink exactly how it operates and how we value institutions as a pure public good versus a private benefit to individual learners.
Thank you very much. And finally, Mr. Kim.
Yeah, so when we actually provided our education, like computer science education to two different companies, but under the same CEO, two different teams. Our courses were, one team had a very restricted, meaning their scores of that course reflected on the performances, and it kind of had a negative reinforcement. So if you fail, then your performance will get degraded and has very negative effect. And the other team actually made a positive methodology where you can do whatever you like, whenever you want to learn, and it's just kind of an autonomous way of learning. And the results of these two, same content, same platform, two different teams with the two different operations, had a very different result. The autonomous way of learning actually had no result at all, because they kind of failed to complete and they just didn't really care about learning. And the other one actually had a very great result where one of the HR with the literature background transferred to data analysis after our courses. So this kind of ponder around because we felt like we wanted to make the learning fun or like easy and autonomous when you want to learn. And we got the result where some kind of negative reinforcements actually worked. Tests kind of promoted the learning. All this kind of data showed us that we don't really know what kind of answers, or we kind of have different way of teaching or different way of operating, and it's different by culture, it's different by institution, it's all different. So that's when we started to make the platform more customizable for the educators, and that's when we started to think the educators will know the students better than we do, and we provide more of those tools to actually make the learning effective. So in terms of whether university will go or not, I think it's not just going to happen, or it will figure out the way to make students learn, and we provide tools to support that. And that's what we try to do.
Thank you very much. Now it's time's up. For just a final remark, the Oscar-winning movie Parasite director Bong Joon-ho made a comment that once you overcome this 1-inch barrier, you will be introduced to so many amazing films. And now we get to wonder what that means for the education sector. In other words, it's time to think of what that 1-inch barrier is going to be in terms of regulation, in terms of technologies, in terms of culture, mindset, and whatever. So definitely one of those 1-inch barriers, I guess, is digital inequality, which is the theme of the next session. So just keep staying with us. So thank you all the speakers for joining this session. And now I'll hand over to Professor Lee for the introduction of the second session. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Professor Kim.
Thank you.
For having us.
Now for the concluding part of today's forum, here is Professor Kyung-Yul Park, chairing the final session on bridging the socioeconomic and digital gaps in education in post-COVID-19 era.
Thank you very much, Professor Lee. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening once again. Welcome to the second session of the KAIST Global Strategy Institute online international forum on the future of education. It's a great pleasure to welcome you all again. My name is Park Kyung-Yul. I'm a faculty member at Graduate School of Science, Technology, and Policy here in KAIST. I'm going to moderate this second keynote session. We have 5 tremendous speakers under the theme of democratization of education to bridge the socio-economic gaps and digital divide in the post-corona era. I spent the past 15 years working on digital inclusion and more broadly speaking, so-called ICT and global development field, in spite of huge expectation and technological optimism on ICTs, there are still many challenges we are facing, particularly in the context of developing countries. So I'm really excited to meet our great speakers and discuss this very important issue today. First of all, I'd like to introduce Mr. Kang Sang-uk, the Director General of Ministry of Science and Education, Science and ICT in Korea. He's been leading the Future Talent Policy Division in the ministry. He also served as the head of Basic Research Department of the Ministry of Education, Science and Technology. In early April, South Korea has begun new school year with online classes. I think Mr. Kang will share some of the very interesting lessons from the practices of Korean government in digital learning. So here is the pre-recorded talk by Mr. Kang Sang-uk.
안녕하십니까. 과학기술정보통신부 미래인재정책국장 강상욱입니다. 저는 오늘 대한민국의 교육혁신 정책 방향과 민간 합동으로 교육 디지털
future direction of educational policy of Korea and our efforts to collaborate with the private sector. On the 13th of March, the Korean government decided to go ahead with the online school opening, and for 10 years after online school opening, the Korean schools have carried out a new experiment. There has been telecommunication among the teachers and students, remote education, and remote lectures offered through EBS platform, and there has been some homework-based courses. Teachers and the students have participated in remote education, and teachers were allowed to select the most effective means of education given the circumstances of the school and the grade of the students. And for students who did not have the devices for remote education, a lot of devices have been distributed to the students, and online and offline lessons have been combined together. And online school opening has been made possible not just by the government, but by the Korean EBS and telecom communications providers and content providers. So the private and private sector collaborated effectively. Of course, Korea has already had a high level of educational infrastructure online. And we were able to deal with soaring number of people who were logging on the online platform because we've had successful support from the private sector. The Ministry of Science and ICT and the Ministry of Education collaborated effectively with the three major communication providers of Korea, offering zero rating, free access to online education websites, and offered unlimited data to students. Especially for low-income families, we rented out smart devices, and Samsung Electronics have donated 3.6 million devices. But there were some unexpected situations, and online education has been imposed on the education ecosystem, creating some unexpected problems. And with the new school opening, the teachers and students did not have a chance to meet before, so there was no rapport built between the teachers and students, so this could lead to lowering of quality of education offered, and also some digital illiteracy of students and teachers in using the online education platform could have led to degradation of quality of education. And high school students, they said that they were satisfied with the level of education, and that was 50%. And for the senior level high school students, the satisfaction rate was as high as 70%. And there has been some digital literacy problems that have been raised. Based on the level of competency of students, teachers, this could also lead to wider digital divide. Teachers who were not used to online education had to struggle providing online education, and we had to think about the individual digital literacy and how it influenced the quality of education in online. And we realized that digital literacy was a key factor influencing the quality of education. And in order to reduce the gap in digital literacy, we had to find a way to enhance the level of digital literacy. For teachers, we provided stable public LMS so that they can generate online education platform, and we also provided them with the related digital devices. And we provided equal access to digital devices to students and also helped them to be able to learn in the digital media environment. Corona-19 has created a situation where it made it impossible for students and teachers to meet in the same classroom, which has been the dominant way of education over the past century. In the post-corona environment, we would have to get used to a new normal in a new out-of-class education. Let us predict the new form of education. We would have to have online education. Online and offline would have to go hand in hand to help the students to build their problem-solving and imagination, creativity skills. When that is made possible, teachers' role will be defined to become facilitators, moderators, mentors, and counselors for students. The role of teacher will definitely change, and education would have to require new types of approaches. AI, 5G, big data will fundamentally change the online platform, and lack of concentration that can be caused in online education will be solved by introducing virtual educational environment. Such innovative education environment and platform will lead to higher level of basic education, creativity, software, algorithm, enhanced use of ICT devices. And we need to prepare a curriculum for those objectives. Students will be directed to engage in self-directed learning and encouraged to learn creative way of learning. There will be no more one-way education. It will be replaced by interactive education, and virtual education environment will be expanded. So based on flipped learning, personalized education will be the dominant platform of education. In order to develop the humans that will be required in the future, the students should be encouraged to think creatively in problem-solving manner. The Korean government is carrying out various programs to create a digitally inclusive environment and came out with education for employed individuals. In order to provide better access to information to low-income families and also to provide equal education environment, we are going to streamline the digital environment for the Korean students by offering a more widespread infrastructure, including digital education center. We are going to help the marginalized people and elderly people to acquire the level of digital skills they need in their daily lives. So we are going to carry out general education for digital literacy, and based on volunteers' activities, we are going to guarantee the access to education for general population. Government-funded research institutions and KAIST will be engaged more in helping the students by donating the smart devices that they are not using, and 1,000 students are volunteering based on their talents, educating students from marginalized families. Such activities will be enhanced, and the Korean government will carry out deregulation to support such activities. Technology and industries are changing rapidly, and in order to adapt themselves to this changing environment, you need lifetime learning. And education for employed individuals will be provided, as well as recurrent education for university graduates. And also people who have lost their jobs will be supported by SafeNet for job transition. We need global collaboration and collaboration between public and private sector. I hope today becomes the starting point for such collaboration. Thank you very much.
For your contribution, Mr. Kang, once again. Now let's move on to the second keynote speaker, Dr. Rebecca Winthrop. She's a senior fellow and co-director of Universal Education and Brookings Institution in Washington, D.C., spending more than 15 years working in the field of education for particularly displaced and migrant communities. Dr. Winthrop works to promote quality education and investigates how different type of innovation in an education sector can leapfrog progress, in particular for the most marginalized children and youth. Based on her experiences, she has authored numerous books and articles on global education. So, hi Rebecca, can you hear me?
Hi, Professor Park, how are you?
Thank you. It must be quite late in Washington, D.C.
Yes, it is. That's okay.
Yeah, thank you so much.
I've been enjoying the session.
Thank you so much for joining us today. So the floor is yours. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Hold on, let me share my slides. Oopsie. Okay, does that appear? Yes, you can see the slide?
Yeah,
okay, fantastic.
Go ahead, thank you.
Okay, so thank you so much for having me. It's lovely to be with you. It's a very interesting session hearing about higher education right before. Just to give you a little bit of background, I run a center at the Brookings Institution, which is a think tank, which our sole purpose is to do research, but really to translate that research into action through advising and working with policymakers and practitioners in the education sector. And we work across many countries, any given year about 40 countries, and also work at the global level. And I must say that this is an incredible time in the world, but certainly in education. And I'm of two minds as to which way we are going to proceed in education. Because on the one hand, I think we might fall backwards 5 or maybe 10 years in global education. If you look at the global, particularly developing countries, the progress that's been made on access, there's real risks of kids falling out of school. You also look across the world, progress being made on academic quality and now increasing as the really fascinating presentation by Mr. Song-Wook Kang just before showed a lot of thinking about not just academic quality, but relevant skills. And there we are starting to see, we work with a number of governments and policymakers around the world, including with ministers of finance, and we're starting to see real pressures on education budgets because health and social protection and economic development, obviously for very good reasons, are going to be prioritized, are being prioritized. We are seeing governments stop their innovation, quote unquote, innovation initiatives and go back to basics. So those are some of the risks we're worried about. On the other hand, as you see from the title of the slide here, there there always is transformative opportunities in any given crisis. I've worked in education and crisis contexts for many years. Never the type of global pandemic we're seeing. So the context is slightly different, but there's a lot of lessons to be learned when you think about rebuilding post-crisis. And there's always an opportunity to transform your system and do something really differently. And for me, when I look at what is really at stake, the theme of this session is around the digital divide. And if you look at the globe, we did some research early on in the COVID crisis. My co-director Miliana Vegas found that less than 25% of low-income countries are offering any form of remote learning, and usually that's some sort of broadcast, radio, TV, whereas 90% of high-income countries are doing remote learning. So this is just widening inequality, the COVID crisis, and so for us, it really is an opportunity to try to think of new transformative, what we call leapfrog approaches. If this is not a leapfrog moment in education, I have no idea what it would be. So let me tell you a little bit about what we mean. We've been very concerned for many years about education inequality. We've done research probably 6 or more years ago showing that there is this 100-year gap in education. It's both between the developing world and the developed world. If the pace of change is the same, low-income, middle-income countries are going to take 100 years to catch up to high-income countries, average student outcomes. But this 100-year gap also exists within countries. So not all countries, maybe not Korea, but it certainly exists in the US and most countries in the world. Between poor students and rich students. So in the United States, it's in some parts of the country, it'll take 126 years for the poorest kids to catch up to the richest kids on basic school readiness indicators. So this is a terrible moral quandary. It's only going to get worse. The World Bank has just, I think, estimated that there's an additional 100 million more people in the world from COVID entering extreme poverty, which is really, really dire and difficult. So, if we have had this 100-year gap before COVID and it's going to be bigger, what are we going to do about it? We spent quite a bit of time thinking about what would leapfrogging look like in education. We got inspired from the financial inclusion sector that particularly examples in Kenya, where mobile banking was invented, where you no longer had to build bank branches. You could just skip right to mobile banking, and all of a sudden, access to credit for those without access to credit were rapidly included. So what would that look like for education was our thinking. And we were very focused on making sure that we weren't leapfrogging to a low common denominator. We were saying, if you're going to leapfrog, it's every kid in the world who should have a full academic plus 21st century skills education, an education that is fit to thrive in the 21st century in work, life, and in citizenship. And so we looked at a bunch of innovations around the world, about 3,000 education innovations. You can see the map here. The darker colors are where there was more. It's not a full census. It's not a map of all the innovations. It was our sample. Innovation comes from all over the place. And leapfrog ideas come from all over the place. And I would argue some of the most creative leapfrog ideas we've found that increasingly jurisdictions we work with in the United States are getting interested in amid COVID come from places without any internet connectivity in sub-Saharan Africa. So I think there's ideas that are exchangeable across borders. We looked at these innovations. We looked at what the evidence says about how you develop in education systems students that can have a full set of strong academic rigor and competence alongside 21st century skills and lifelong learning competence. And what we realized is that most countries have advanced their education systems really in a stepwise process. And this is true for the United States, it's true for the Global South, where access was the first thing. It was all about expansion. This was the name of the game in the United States 150 years ago. Build schools, make them free, make them compulsory. And then after that, a little while after that, there was a realization that we better pay attention to academic quality. So teacher training was a big focus, etc. And then once those two dimensions seem to be more or less under control, this idea of relevance kicks in, that it's not just getting kids into school and making sure they have basic foundational literacy, numeracy, academic rigor. It's also making sure they have these skills that are going to help them survive in work and life. And this is, in many countries, a long, long process. And many countries are stuck between access and quality right now. Only some jurisdictions, I would say, are doing all three. And so we said, in order to really leapfrog, what you need to do is to do all of them, all of those steps, all at the same time. And that is, of course, very ambitious and scary to many education leaders, but it's possible. We have some examples at scale, not a ton, but I do believe it's possible. And it's really 4 buckets to transform teaching and learning. So it's not only direct instruction, but it's interactive pedagogical approaches, just like the previous speaker was talking about, so kids can get the full suite of skills they need. And it's right alongside that, you have to transform how learning is recognized, both within the school, how young people are progressed through their educational career, but also how external employers, higher education institutions, community groups recognize the skills of people. This was mentioned by a previous speaker in the earlier panel. And then it's nice to have, and we think it's probably really important given the big scale of the problem, that you need to diversify people and places and harness technology and data to not just replace what analog functions are doing, but do something totally different. What the slide I have here is a much sort of smaller version, I'm not sure if you can see, of the more detailed leapfrog pathway, which I'm not going to go into in any great depth. But I just wanted to point out, and in the green boxes on technology and data, there's a very well accepted framework called the SAMR model, coming out of Harvard some time ago, that says this is a model for how you could harness technology to really transform education. So don't focus on using technology to substitute for analog paper and pencil functions. If you might want to save trees, that's fine. Augmentation is, if substitution is a multiplication worksheet on an iPad or tablet, augmentation is that worksheet that's automatically graded and saves the teacher time, which is fine and good. But really what you want to do is focus on using technology to really modify and redefine what's possible. And I actually think we have some wonderful panelists who are great examples of that. So Anuma is a great example of actually, which we will hear about soon, of totally modifying and redefining how technology can teach literacy and numeracy in a way that, in my mind, is really leapfrogging. And I think Smart Africa is laying the foundation, actually, for a number of new innovations to be layered on top. So I would encourage all sort of policymakers, organizations, practitioners to really look at this leapfrog pathway. We think of this as a map, figure out where you are on this map, and then think about the different approaches out there that you could use to sort of travel up the map towards a more leapfrog approach. Ultimately, what we really want is for policymakers and practitioners in education to adopt this leapfrog mindset, which you can see here. I won't read it for you, but we have found, having worked on this idea for a little bit of a time and worked with policymakers and practitioners, that it's not that there aren't leapfrog approaches out there, and we're going to hear of some in just a minute. It's that many people are confined by dominant logic, the mindset of what has come before, and it's very hard to break out of. So I will end there and say thank you very much. And let me stop sharing.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. You just introduced the ANOMA, so we can actually connect your conceptualization of leapfrogging to the next speaker. So I'd like to introduce Ms. Soo-In Lee. She's a co-founder and CEO of ANOMA, which is an education technology company. Her firm developed very exceptional learning apps for children in a marginalized group to become independent learners. Recently, ANOMA created Kid School in developing countries, named co-winner of a Global Learning X Prize competition in 2019. So, welcome, Ms. Lee.
Hello, can you hear me well?
Yes, you're joining us from Berkeley.
Oh, yes, yep. So this is about 8 p.m. here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. So I'm Soo-In Lee, CEO of ANOMA. So I just got a really amazing session with Dr. Winthrop, and I will just tell that what was the one of the showcase of the technology that can be usable for closing the gap and really leapfrogging the current education crisis. So already Dr. Winthrop just tell you about what was there as an inequality. The term literacy crisis existed even before the era of COVID-19, and there are 250 million children cannot read or write. That was the base of our own ambition to solve this problem. So many countries have tried tablet-based education for early learners for more than 10 years, but most of those projects has failed with a similar patterns. So the technology that is originally invented to teach children to learn with the children who has basic literacy and digital literacy was not working for children who doesn't have any foundation. So many of technology projects for online education or tablet-based education just wasted because they just couldn't get in for children to touch and learn whatever from that technology. So from 2014, the Global Learning X Prize competition started based on that awareness of the problem. So the designer of Global Learning X Prize got a $15 million donation by Elon Musk. Think the open source and scalable software that make children to learn all by themselves, how to read, write, do basic count without any literate adult help around. So that was 5 years of competition, and the last 15 months of the competition from late 2017 to early 2019, they installed the 5 finalist software to rural area in Tanzania and see what happens. And we, in long story short, we are the one of co-winner of Global Learning X Prize. And we demonstrated that children can learn actually without adult help, just with only tablet software. Kid School is game-based self-directed learning software. When we think about the children in developing countries, we didn't rush to teach first grade skills. We believe that motivation to learn, motivation to turn on the tablet device is the hardest thing to teach. So we build on our education software on top of motivation to learn early childhood development before teaching any ABC or 1, 2, 3, because we don't know what is 13 years old in rural area in Tanzania know and ready to learn basic academic skills. And we follow universal design for learning principle to help children who have various learning needs also can include to this learning process. The 15 months of research of Global Learning Exercise competition was conducted by UNESCO and World Food Program. They recruited 3,000 children in 170 villages in rural area in Tanzania. Most of those children are out of school, and only 6% of those children can read one word. After 15 months, the winning softwares demonstrated 2 to 7 times of higher learning gain compared to the control group. And more than 30% of learners can read full sentence. Actually, the learning gain that Global Learning Exercise demonstrated was equivalent to 1 year of school experience for the children. What we demonstrated is this: children can learn basic reading, writing, math with a tablet software without any other literate adults' help. In the era of digital education, better software leads to children achieve better learning outcomes. So KIT School is actually released as open source in GitHub. And after the pandemic, with the help of Korean International Cooperation Agency, we decided to distribute it for free and provide the support to any organization deal with the pandemic until the end of 2021. We originally designed KIT School for out-of-school learners in really low access area. But the flexibility of this design actually works in many different environment. So before the pandemic in late 2019, we pilot tested in the refugee camp in learners who speak Rohingya couldn't read or write because there was no written language form in Rohingya language. So those children need to learn English and how to read, write, count at the same time. But there was no school. So community, the NGO and community gathered those children in each houses, and about 8 to 10 children come to this house and learn all by themselves for 1 to 2 hours under the house owner's supervision. And after the pandemic, some community school in Tanzania realized that they still can teach children with tablet devices. So while teachers couldn't show up, children come to the classroom and keep some of social distancing and learn 1 to 2 hours while the school has been closed. And we have Korean version that is originally designed for immigrant families in Korea. We originally designed to test it in the community center for immigrant families, but because of the pandemic, we just start beta test in each children's household. And that is totally working because this program is working with if there is tablet and children in the. So right now, our challenge is to respond to many different environment and culture. So as you see, we design ESL version with Rohingya language instruction. We design Swahili version, English version, Korean version, and right now Spanish version and Indonesia version is in our pipeline. We believe that this type of self-directed independent learning tool is really, really crucial for many different languages and culture to respond to this post-COVID situation. And we believe that covering from early childhood to second grade as a whole is a key, especially in developing countries setting. And the most important thing is how accessible the application is. So we try to add as many as accessibility functionality for those who are special needs or who are from immigrant families or who actually learn this program as a in second language setting.
Excuse me, Ms. Lee?
So, yes?
We are actually still seeing the your slide. It's titled "The Literacy Crisis."
Wow.
It's okay. I was thinking there was a kind of slow internet connection, but
how about now?
no problem. Thank you.
So how's this?
Yes, now we are seeing the post-COVID-19 literacy crisis is coming.
Wow.
Thank you.
So you didn't have any chance to see all those photos?
We can also check these great pictures on your website.
Oh, so let's see. So did you see all those pages so far, or did you see just my title?
That's the first page, yeah.
Yes. And you saw all those pages, and now I move to the page 11.
Yes.
How's it?
Thank you. Yeah, you can just go ahead from the page 11. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so the post-COVID literacy crisis is coming, and we dream digital basic education for all. And we believe that we must teach basic literacy, math, and digital literacy to all, include out-of-school children and adults. So before the pandemic, there was 264 million learners out of school, and temporarily there are more than 1.6 billion children are out of school. But to respond to this fastly changing world, we should include children and adults who need to learn all those basic skills with technology. So going digital opens a possibility of revolutionary change, but we are still in the legacy of education system that raised us. So for example, in traditional education system, they start education at 7 years old and expecting all those learners can start first grade. But that is not true in our experience working in different cultures and environment. But it will be even more true to just say, after 3 years in the school system, these children will not ready to 3rd grade. Or maybe he will be ready to 4th grade. So we should jump into proficiency-based learning, skill-based learning, rather than just grading children by their age, and just make them move to next grade after 1 year. In this all transition, the quality of the software is the key to make any learning progress. So we all know that not all classrooms are the same, and not all classrooms promise children's learning gain. But in software, there is no basic qualification we have for the school system. So we really need to be aware of the quality of the software. But unfortunately, not all culture and language can produce the best software for their learners on their own. So in order to provide basic education software, at least in every academic language, we need global collaboration that has really strong awareness of how sensitive the quality of software is and how distributing it to many different cultures and languages are crucial of this basic education software of basic education for all. So that is end of my presentation. Thank you for allowing me this precious time.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Very impressive talk, Mr. Lee. I'd like to hear a little bit more about key challenges you've been facing that you just mentioned and how you actually overcome those challenges. But we can still discuss and learn from you in the discussion session. And thank you very much. Now we have another great speaker to provide us with fresh insights based on his extensive experiences. I'd like to introduce Dr. Hamukasa Mulira. Dr. Mulira, do you hear me?
I can. Thank you very much, Professor Park. Yes.
Can
you hear me?
Bulunzi. So are you joining us from Kampala?
Yes, I'm joining you from Kampala in Uganda.
Yeah, it must be very
early in the morning.
Very early in the morning.
Yes, no, it's about 6:15 here.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're very honored to have you here today. So Dr. Mulira is the chairperson of the Governing Council at Virtual University of Uganda, VUU for short, which is the very first sub-Saharan African online-based private university. Also, Dr. Mulira, you have been serving as the senior presidential advisor, and you are the pioneer minister of ICT in Uganda. So, welcome, Minister. We are really excited to hear from you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Professor Park. So I'm going to be talking about leveraging digital technologies in learning, the Ugandan case. And it was quite interesting to see the previous talks by Dr. Winthrop and Dr. Lee on what's been happening, and the previous speaker. Just to give a brief outline of what Uganda is, this is a map of Uganda. This is the population distribution blobs. The bigger blobs are about over 1.7 million people, population density. This is Uganda in relation to Africa. It's right in the center of Africa. And Africa with respect to the world. Just a few socioeconomic factors about Uganda. Our area is 93,000 square kilometers, or 240,000 square miles, 240,000 square kilometers. Our population is about 42 million. English is our official language. Our literacy rate is about 66.8. Our population, student population is about 15 million across board from pre-primary up to higher education. If you notice, we only have about 300,000 in higher education tertiary institutions. So what happens to the remaining 14-point-something million people? If we look at post-COVID, in December, when China officially announced the case of COVID-19, we have here the action and effects. We had normal activities in Uganda, normal in the world. And I think this was the case in many other countries before we knew that it was actually going to grow into the rest of the world. Then in March, when the WHO declared COVID as a global pandemic, Uganda decided to go into a lockdown. Lockdown, of course, meant staying at home. Non-essential services were cut off. And of course, schools were closed. Slowed down economic growth, impaired teaching and learning, social activity, and slump. At first, it was thought that it would be for about 14 days or 21 days. But of course, that wasn't the case. Then we started a new way of living, of staying at home, working from home, and of course, studying from home. Then in May, there was a bit of easing and movement was allowed. The economy started growing a little bit. Improvised teaching started, and some social activity also came on board. And now in June, there's further easing. But all this has had an effect on teaching. What happens to the schools? They've been closed for almost 3 months now, and there's no indication as to when they're actually going to be opening. So what is the future post-COVID? As all the previous speakers have been saying, the future lies in the use of digital tools in imparting knowledge. In general, of course, we have in business, we have the online meetings, Zoom, of course, with the problems of, sometimes problems of connectivity and the like we've just experienced, social media, online purchasing, and web presence. Educationally, we also have the online teaching, Zoom, radio, TV, social media, and the rest. So, like all other countries, the government of Uganda set up a national task force, and each sector also had their own task forces to address issues related to within their sector. And of course, the education sector under the Ministry of Education designed and developed a preparedness and response plan for COVID, and in particular, a framework for the provision of continued learning. There are many objectives, about 5, but one, to ensure continued learning at home, but using the different modes, to highlight the different modes of lesson delivery, to guide teachers on how to develop those using radio and TV, and to also guide stakeholders on their responsibilities in this new way of imparting knowledge, and provide learning opportunities through different mediums of communication, TV, radio, and the internet. Now, it's interesting because Dr. Lee showed examples in Tanzania and the other developing countries on areas on how we can ensure equitable access to all to education. So I'm going to show you 4 different types of schools. We have a rural school. You see there's no desks. Children don't have this. Then we have a mid-level urban school where desks, some electricity. And then we have an urban school with students having computer labs. So while they're at school, they have access to computers. And then we have the top-level urban schools. These children have even access to computers in their own homes. In fact, each one has a laptop or iPad. So how do we ensure that we impart the same knowledge to all these children, given the discrepancies, socioeconomic discrepancies? And they're going to be sitting the same national exams. So non-contact learning for the typical rural, we're using radio and learning materials because they have access to radios. In the mid-level learning, we have on top of the radio and TV, we also have learning materials which are sent through newspapers, or the Ministry of Education also sends materials for self-taught, self-learning activities. But you will notice that some of these requires parents to get involved. But children in this typical rural school, their parents are probably not educated, so they cannot guide them. These ones they can. So we also have CD-ROMs where prepackaged educational material is access to laptops and digital technologies. The newspapers. In these upper levels, on top of all that, we also have the internet, which could be used. We have online teaching using Zoom. We also have social media for questions, for interaction, both ways interaction, and newspapers. Today, newspapers always produce learning materials across all subjects for primary and secondary levels. And then in the top level urban schools, as we said, these children have access to their personal devices. A child, as Professor Lee mentioned, these were great initiatives, but unfortunately, they were not able to take off for various reasons. When we get to higher education, we have the regulator, which is the National Council of Higher Open Distance and e-learning system for enabling higher education training institutions to offer continued learning. Initially during the COVID pandemic, but post-COVID to continue with that. And then the World Bank, under what is known as the Higher Education Science and Technology Project, KAIST, also provided inputs into this. Actually, this happened even before COVID. The ODEL benefits, key benefits are teaching and learning system, an application focusing on learners as opposed to the conventional face-to-face, and continuous engagements between the instructor and learners as well. Universities apply for this support, provided they fulfill these criteria. And the HEST project helps to institutionalize e-learning in the ICT policy, both the national policy and the institution-wide policies. And HEST also provided the basic infrastructure, networking fiber. This is for higher institutions. And teaching aids, access to equipment, servers, and mini data centers. They also provided support in development of online course units and training also of staff, as people have alluded. Even if you have the technology, if the people who are going to impart the knowledge are not in a position to use this technology, then it's of course of no use. So quickly, virtual university, a quick example of a university which is online. We mentioned the virtual university is the first private university, online university in Africa. It has been rebranded to be Nexus International University. And the aim here was to provide quality online education for students who can learn while they earn. In other words, working students at their own pace and in their own place. The university has two arms. One is offering postgraduate programs for now, been in existence for about 6 to 8 years. And these are the courses which we're offering. The other arm is the Corporate Academy, which offers a learning platform for short courses to clients. Corporate group training, private sector come for group training, and then certification training for individuals in the various areas as listed below. To date, we have had over 500 students, and our students come from 17 plus nationalities within Africa. Of course, our training is 100% online, and our faculty comes from more than 10 countries across Africa and beyond. What would we consider the challenges of online non-contact learning? Well, the digital technologies, if I may, apart from the computers, mobile phones, and others, we include radios and televisions. And these play a pivotal role in non-contact teaching and learning through, of course, remote access to learners, access to global information resources, libraries, even professors, faculty. Also collaboration between learners and facilitators, and promotion of anytime, anywhere, anyhow learning. The major challenges are inequality in access. As we saw those students, the various schools, various categories, even if the school had the ability to provide non-contact online education, if the recipient does not have access to the technologies, then again, it's a waste of time. So the availability also of reliable infrastructure, internet access, high speed, the economic status of the individuals, and the skills in use, the e-competence, which I've already alluded to. And of course, when we talk about inclusion, we should also include people with disabilities, visual and even physical, mainly visual and hearing disabilities. Then the equipment, access to equipment, the cost of acquisition, cost of internet access, the sustainability of hardware and software, because it keeps evolving, as we have had in previous presentations. Then the skills levels, the teachers and students, administrators, being able to be brought on board in the digital online environment. Then, of course, the global availability of funds to support, then security, privacy, and copyright against plagiarism. And the major one is motivation to both students and the people imparting the knowledge. The possible remedies are blended approach, which the many previous speakers have mentioned. That is, of course, the concurrent implementation of traditional teaching methodologies, face-to-face, and technology-enhanced methodologies. What we have done, there are satellite centers in the districts, so people can, those who are impaired in access, can have centers where they can go and at least have some level of access to the technologies. Then, of course, the teaching materials which are sent by post. Then we have radio and TV. Radios and TVs have been broadcasting very many educational programs at various levels. And the CD-ROMs, the video lectures, as mentioned before. In conclusion, digital technologies have a huge potential to improving the provision and acquisition of education and learning, as we have tried. COVID-19 has provided a testament for their usage in teaching and learning at all levels. What started as temporary emergency measures for continued learning. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mulila, for your talk in spite of this unexpected technical difficulties. So, is Sadia Zahidi is here?
Hi, can you see me?
Right. So, thank you so much. So, I'd like to invite our next speaker, Sadia Zahidi. She's the managing director at the World Economic Forum. Sadia has been leading numerous publications and research, including Future of Jobs report and Global Gender Gap Report in World Economic Forum. More importantly, she has won many awards with her very insightful book titled 50 Million Rising, on the rise of working women in the Muslim world. Sadia, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me, and thank you for the very kind introduction. Also a pleasure to listen to most of the other speakers. I will apologize, it is 5 a.m. Here in Geneva, so not necessarily at my best, but I will still try to pass on as much as possible of some of the work that we're doing at the forum. I've roughly sort of labeled this area of work within the broader new economy and society agenda that we're driving at the forum as enabling education 4.0 to stay sort of connected to the theme. But as you just mentioned, there's a lot of work we're doing on the future of jobs, on reskilling and upskilling for adult workers, as well as redeployment and re-employment at the present moment in time. I'm going to state what I think a lot of other speakers have already mentioned, that in many ways, COVID-19 has exposed the existing gaps that already were there in our education systems, and that could have very profound and long-lasting negative impacts on childhood learning. So much of this was gaps and inequalities that existed already, but obviously there has been a shock to the system that could potentially exacerbate some of these inequalities. A few quick facts. I think all of you are very familiar with this. Among 188 countrywide school closures, at its peak, this was 1.54 billion learners that were out of school. And this is going to have an outsized impact over time, because a 4-week closure can move an average child down to the bottom 30%. And this effect is greater for low-income families. There's potentially up to a year of learning gains that are lost per student. And then, of course, there are some imbalances that also affect girls more than boys in some parts of the world. And then finally, this could, if we do want to quantify it, this could cost upwards of $161 million per day in many economies due to the lost future income. So a number of negative effects. At the same time, and I think Rebecca referred to this, the types of experiments and innovations that have happened in different parts of the world, they are not limited to certain, they're not limited along the lines of certain pre-existing inequalities. You're starting to see very, very interesting experiments happening in different parts of the world. This is a very rough categorization. We're still sort of working on this and collecting some of those best practice examples. So for example, in Vietnam, Argentina, South Africa, France, and Oman, you've seen TV and radio based broadcast education. And then, on the other end of the spectrum, you've had national e-learning platforms be deployed in places like Uruguay and Germany and Russia and Switzerland, et cetera, et cetera. There's also been much greater use of the EdTech marketplace, obviously, and the way we're also connecting today, a lot of video conferencing, e-textbooks, which have been available in many parts of the world already, a greater shift towards them in other places, and then sort of social media-based education in certain parts of the world as well. So there have been these interesting experiments, and again, this has the opportunity to shake up the way things have been done in the past. Yet it does, again, depend very much on this digital divide. That existing digital divide does end up undermining a lot of these efforts. 50% of students don't have a computer at home, and less than 10% of schools are connected to the internet in many developing economies. And so, again, along the same lines as pre-existing inequalities, whether those were income inequalities or in this case, the digital divide, the fissures in societies may grow along these lines. Now, why does this matter? I think we all are very, very familiar with the literature here. We tried to quantify the specific effect of different parts of the education, health, workplace effects on social mobility. And we launched earlier this year a global social mobility index. And on average, and this of course looks very different in different parts of the world, but on average, health and technology access is having a less outsized impact than education quality and equity and education access. And of course, the greatest concerns still lie within the workplace itself, whether that's relation to fair wages or social protection. Lifelong learning is the other critical factor. At the same time, and this has not much to do with COVID and the current situation that you're seeing, this is the set of work that we and many others have been promoting for some time, that skills demand in the labor market has already been changing very rapidly in the last few years. The fourth industrial revolution has been underway for quite some time, and this crisis is only likely to accelerate a lot of those trends because of the way that the workplace is changing and because of the way many industries will move towards their recovery. So this was from our last Future of Jobs work, and we have a new one coming up in a couple of months, which is that the core skills that will be required by just 2022 alone in most roles will change by 42%. And everybody who's in the current workforce would require nearly 3 months of learning. And that is simply not something that most people are doing in the current workforce. And that's obviously has an impact on the education system. And COVID is in many ways exacerbating this impact. So there's a much greater need for technology skills, much greater need for interpersonal skills, etc. What we tried to put together, and again, this is pre the current crisis, and we may revise parts of this framework, but not by much, is understand what are the common factors in what we would call schools of the future. Some of the people that you've had in this panel, as well as the panel before, have actually helped contribute to this framework. And we put out a call to schools all around the world to try to understand what are the specific common factors that lead to them being ahead of the curve, both in terms of the content that they're teaching and also how that content is being deployed. And that framework roughly results in these 8 points. So one element being global citizenship skills. And even though we are in the midst of this lockdown and in some ways a stop to the current flow of goods and services and trade across borders, this has become an area that is more important than ever before, particularly if we hope to care more about sustainability, climate change, etc. globally. A second element is around innovation and creativity skills. Again, not surprising to any of you, this is an area where a lot more needs to be done, but it has often been confused by the deployment of technology, and where this innovation and creativity actually needs to be applied across multiple areas. There is, however, the element around technology skills and a shift to include content that's based on developing digital skills, including programming, digital responsibility, and the use of technology. So staying safe online is a critical part of that. And then finally, interpersonal skills, which again, not surprising, emotional intelligence, empathy, cooperation, negotiation, leadership, and social awareness. On the right-hand side, you're seeing the experiences, the how, the formats with which some of this is being delivered. So personalized and self-paced learning is a critical part of what we identified as being a success for the schools of the future. Accessible and inclusive learning, again, not surprising. Problem-based and collaborative learning, something that most schools do not teach. And then finally, lifelong and student-driven learning, which is different from personalized and self-paced learning. This is much more about a system where learning and skilling from a system where learning and skilling decrease over one's lifespan to one where everyone is continuously improving and building on their existing skills, and that being a mindset. I will stop there. This is essentially 8 points associated with our Education 4.0 framework derived from multiple examples around the world, and we'll be doing additional versions of this later on this year. But I hope that the main points came across. Thank you.
Since we have limited time left for discussion, so let's just get into the points for discussion. So, Dr. Rebecca Winthrop, so what you just mentioned in your slides on education innovation was very interesting. So you talked about COVID-19 being a real leapfrog moment for education globally. But I do think that at the same time, we still have many ongoing challenges, especially in the context of a developing country. So like you just referred to 100-year gap. So leapfrog moment. So could you briefly tell us why you say that and what you mean by?
Yeah, I mean, I think in some ways the developing world is going to leapfrog faster than the sort of developed economies, because there's going to be less money, and there's equal aspiration and equal level of smarts and desire to make a difference amongst young people. And governments, if they're open to it, can find great ways to leapfrog. Enuma is a great example of leapfrogging. It's offline. It's totally transformed how you can learn literacy and numeracy. It doesn't necessarily replace a teacher, but it could free up teachers to really do some of the problem solving, creative work, if you could give them some key sort of playful learning projects to do. So you could envision something that's very feasible, where kids are, you know, learning much better than currently literacy and numeracy, including in that in the many rural schools, that picture that Dr. Malima showed us, that are across sub-Saharan Africa, and are doing a lot of sort of citizenship, playful learning projects in the community to develop the teamwork and 21st century skills they need, facilitated by a teacher. That is very feasible today, and could be something that could be scaled around the world. That's just one little example.
Oh, thank you so much. So connecting this discussion to the first session today, so we mainly discussed about emerging opportunities of using ICTs in the education sector. And it seems there are many good practices, such as Enuma. But a key problem remains here, the issue of scalability. So this scale-up issue is also related to how we actually measure the effectiveness of ICT intervention and the performance of ICT-enabled education. Okay, what about Sadia? Do you have any thoughts on this? Maybe we can just go Sadia first.
Sure. Can you please share the specific question?
Right. In terms of regarding the how we can actually measure the performance and effectiveness of ICT-enabled education. And also, this is actually related to the local context, because in reality, most of ICTs actually is developed and designed in advanced country and is diffused to the other context. So here's the core questions: how we can include the local community in this shaping process of digital technologies?
Sure. I mean, I think I'll probably make a very sort of rudimentary point, which is that a lot of these technologies are neutral. They're only going to be as useful or as unhelpful as the context in which they're being applied. And so how they're delivered, how policymakers attempt to scale them, how they run the pilots that give them enough information locally to then decide whether to even scale some of these technologies, I think that will matter a lot. And the way education is run in most countries, there has to be much more policymaker involvement. I think the other point here is, as Rebecca mentioned, there are massive gaps and inequalities even within one country, sometimes even within one school district. And so there are some sort of unplanned trials and pilots that are going on. But again, it requires this innovative mindset to help transfer some of those experiments into something that is scaled. And so my response would simply come down to, I don't think that there is anything magical about any of the technologies. I think we have a very good understanding of what is available, what is not. There are a lot of things on the market. There's a lot of great solutions, but they remain very small. And if we want to be able to deploy them much more than before, then we have to be working in a more innovative way on that actual deployment. And that comes down to policymakers. That to some extent also comes down to a better understanding within the edtech sector itself, that their job has to be to attempt to scale and to work much more with the more traditional education systems. And finally, it does require an upskilling and reskilling of the teaching workforce itself. And particularly as the most popular technologies have started to show that they can augment the teacher rather than replace the teacher, I think there's a sort of inbuilt incentive to focus much more on some of that reskilling and upskilling, because in many ways it actually makes the teacher's job easier as well. So it does require concerted effort across those three areas. And the point that I already made earlier, which is that obviously to do this in a more equal fashion, we do need that digital connectivity across all schools and not just certain parts of the world.
Thank you very much, Sadia. So you've been leading this the global debate on gender equality. So many of the speakers already talked about digital inclusion in the session. The lack of access to ICTs actually amplifies the existing social gap, especially with the marginalized groups. So for Rebecca, as a kind of final concluding remark, so in this post-COVID era, post-COVID-19 era, what should be the priorities or the target groups of intervention of ICT-enabled education?
If you have limited resources and you're a policymaker or a funding organization, I would absolutely target those left behind. I think there's no question. And I'll take the US as an example, but you can apply the same principles to any other country. So it's the poor, it's the rural, it's students who don't speak the mother tongue. A huge problem that we've seen is so much of the online content is really only available in a few languages. So in the United States, that has very robust English as second language programs for many students, because we have many school districts that have different languages spoken. Online learning is really just in English. So you have to really invest in those priorities. For kids with disabilities, you mentioned gender. I think that's actually a really big topic that we haven't explored enough. We have colleagues at our center, for example, who work in Mexico and work on gender equality in education and are reporting 20% increase in gender-based violence and a huge, disadvantage because they're not given access to ICTs, particularly in rural Mexico. So those are some thoughts.
Thank you so much. Any final comments from Sadia? We have one more minute.
No, thank you. I think maybe just the only other point I'll make is we're as much as this is a moment for rethinking, I think there were some common wisdoms and some emerging sort of set of trends that were already very clear before this latest crisis emerged. And so let's ensure that we use this crisis to build back better in a way that also addresses those pre-existing challenges, whether those are the digital divide, whether those are gender inequalities, and let's ensure that we don't become myopically focused on just some specific aspects of the current crisis.
Thank you so much. All right, it's been very exciting discussion today, and once again, apologies for difficulties today's session. Thank you all. As we discussed, obviously, we entered a new era of digital society. So digital technologies have great potential for educational improvement, but at the same time, technology is not a panacea. So how we actually coordinated and resilient we are to respond to this crisis would definitely define our future. So we must work together to consider these implications that we just discussed in this session today, and ensure that digital technologies evolve into a more equal and inclusive space for the public good. So all the speakers, thank you very much for your excellent talks. We hope to continue our discussion all together on these very important issues of digital inclusion and global education. Right, so for Rebecca,
thank you.
Good night there. And goodbye for Sadia. Thank you very much.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you very much. Now I'd like to conclude this second keynote session, and also huge thanks to the audience for watching this online international forum. I'm Park Kyung-yeol from KAIST. It was a great honor to moderate this session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Park. That concludes the discussion portion of our forum. Thank you all very much for your attention and participation. For our closing remarks, I would like to turn the floor over to Professor Jung-ho Kim, the director of the Global Strategy Institute, who has, through his tremendous effort and passion, made this forum series possible.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. It has been almost 4 hours of very intensive and informative presentations and discussions. Thanks for your wonderful participations. I will make my closing remarks as short as possible so that you can go for lunch or bed or work. First of all, I would like to express my deep gratitude to everyone who participates in today's GSI International Forum 2020. While you are online or offline, it is a relief that the internet is able to bring all of us together in this virtual world. I strongly believe that this forum is especially valuable with the wide-ranging discussions on the subject of envisioning the future of education. As we all know, we as a world are still fighting against the COVID-19 pandemic. And yet, evidence suggests that we still have a long way to go before a vaccine or cure medicine of virus is available. During this time, students of all ages, from young children to university students, have been greatly affected by the COVID-19, as many have been stripped of the opportunity to receive adequate instructions at school and in the classroom. Currently, the only solution that has been put in place is online education. Its main benefits include the freedom of location and time. Anyone can gain access to education wherever they are, whenever they are connected. However, this also comes with new forms of inequality. With this background in mind, we have organized this GSI International Forum. I'm immensely grateful to all of speakers and participants for their amazing contributions today. Lastly, I also would like to extend a special thanks to Director So-young Kim and their staff members. Our next forum in September will discuss the innovative directions and specific details of the future healthcare system in the Corona-19 era, as well as in the post-coronavirus era. We hope to search for new solutions so that all the mankind on earth can live happier,
healthier, and longer lives together. I'm looking forward to seeing you then again. Thank you very much. Have a nice day.
Thank you very much, and that concludes our forum.